Chapter 80. When Han Shuo landed on the ground and steadied himself again, he took a look around and discovered that he was in an enormous laboratory. All sorts of containers and enormous bones were placed everywhere. On the walls to the side, a few ghostly green lanterns lit up the interior so that it was no longer completely dark. There were also a few rooms in the surroundings. When Han Shuo entered the rooms one by one, he discovered that two of the rooms were filled with all sorts of books on necromancy magic, including some on dark magic. The books here all appeared to be very ancient and were covered with a lot of dust. The collection of books here was even more voluminous than the library of the Academy of Magic and Force. Many of the books were ones that Han Shuo had never heard of before. The other four rooms were filled with all sorts of magical materials. All the containers were sealed and filled with colorful liquids, as well as some peculiar bones and the shining teeth of vicious magical beasts. Just as Han Shuo was taking in his surroundings, the green ball in his hand suddenly blossomed with a dazzling green light. The light enveloped the entire laboratory, and a dark, ghostly shadow suddenly appeared in a circular magical symbol in the middle of the laboratory. "My child, welcome. When you see this mirror image, I will have already returned to the earth. If you want to understand everything about the cemetery of death, you must pay attention to every word I say." The dark shadow was thick and thick. Whether it was the lanterns or the light of the green ball, neither allowed Han Shuo to see its original appearance. It spat out one word after another with some difficulty in a hoarse voice. Han Shuo was shocked and immediately understood that this was a way for mages to leave behind information, mirror images. According to the meaning of the words, Han Shuo quickly concentrated and started to listen to every word it said. First of all, you must know that the Cemetery of Death was the holy land of necromancers in our era. It symbolized the pinnacle of necromancy magic. The Cemetery of Death can be moved. As long as you can control everything here in the end, you will discover that you possess a terrifying city. The faint voice continued to narrate. Han Shuo focused his attention and listened to the voice's slow narration. When the voice said, "You can still see me on the next level," the dark shadow suddenly disappeared without a trace. Apart from the large-scale magical matrix on the top floor, the laboratory and library on this floor, there were 2 floors below the Cemetery of Death. If one wanted to completely grasp all the secrets of the Cemetery of Death, they had to reach the 2 floors below together. From the dark shadow's words, Han Shuo understood that the Cemetery of Death was actually a moving castle, and a castle with boundless power. This greatly shocked Han Shuo. The green ball was the key to the Cemetery of Death. It contained the necromancer's evil mental brand. Apart from necromancers with necromancy aura of death, ordinary people who obtained this ball would not be able to escape its corrosion and would ultimately turn into a senseless zombie. Although Han Shuo was only a magic apprentice, he still had the aura of a necromancer. Fortunately, he had not been assimilated by the curse. However, because his mental strength was too weak, if it wasn't for the help of his magical yuan, he would likely have been unable to escape death if he had rashly used his mental strength to explore. The miraculous magical yuan was different from any energy in this world. It had actually helped Han Shuo. When Han Shuo's mental strength had invaded his brain, it had unimaginably helped him increase his mental strength. Han Shuo had continuously reaped great rewards amidst the inhuman pain. This was something that even the creator of the round ball would not have imagined. The information that Han Shuo had obtained from the Dark Shadow's narration was limited. It seemed that a more in-depth explanation existed on the 2 floors below. Han Shuo mused silently for a moment and once again entered the room where the magic books were stored. Magic books were the crystallization of necromancy magic, products from the peak of necromancy magic. These were priceless treasures to Han Shuo. The Babylon Academy of Magic and Force already had a very large collection of books, but there weren't that many books on necromancy magic. Moreover, many of them were only books on basic and intermediate magic. There were very few books on more advanced necromancy magic. In the 2 rooms, Han Shuo flipped through the magic books that were already covered in a thick layer of dust. He couldn't help but sigh with emotion. The magic books here were much higher in quality and quantity compared to those in the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force. 3 of the magic books were called necromancy magic. They were divided into upper, middle, and lower volumes and placed in the most conspicuous places. These 3 volumes had obviously been given special treatment and were stored in a magic container. They looked as new as ever and would not be damaged even after tens of thousands of years. Just the first volume of Necromancy Magic was already very thick. After opening it, Han Shuo discovered that the first volume had a detailed explanation from the origin of necromancy magic to the essence of necromancy magic. The knowledge within was very different from what was taught in the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force. Some of the necromancy knowledge and magic recorded in the first volume were mostly things that Han Shuo had never heard of before. Starting from the middle volume, there was a handwritten note on every page, with detailed notes on that page. However, it looked like the 3 volumes were a whole. When Han Shuo read the second and second volumes, even with the help of the handwritten notes, he still couldn't understand some of the knowledge within. Han Shuo could just barely understand the first half of the first volume, but unfortunately, this volume didn't have the help of the handwritten notes. This still made Han Shuo feel that it was very difficult. Perhaps the person who prepared this set of magic books thought that the visitor didn't need any notes at all to understand the first volume, and thus didn't leave behind any explanations. After thinking for a while, Han Shuo decided to start with the first volume. He planned to use this complete set of necromancy magic as a teaching material and slowly study and practice it. After making up his mind, Han Shuo took the round ball and left this level, returning to the upper level. He wasn't obstructed by the boundary and then completely immersed himself in studying this volume of magic, forgetting to eat and sleep. For a few days, Han Shuo hugged this volume of necromancy magic and tried to understand every word and sentence on it. From this volume of necromancy magic, Han Shuo understood that the magical knowledge he'd studied at the academy, including some of the release spells, was much more superficial than the explanations in the book. There were also many evil spells that Han Shuo hadn't been able to learn from Fanny. Corpse Resurrection was one of the most basic necromancy spells. It could directly turn the dead into zombies and start fighting according to the caster's will. As long as one's mental strength was strong enough, they could resurrect a terrifying zombie army. Canopy of Necromancy was another evil spell. As long as the Canopy of Necromancy was released, the combat strength and agility of dark creatures would be greatly increased under the cover of the Canopy of Necromancy. The enemy would be very uncomfortable under the cover of the Canopy of Necromancy, and their combat strength would be greatly reduced. There were quite a few spells like Corpse Resurrection and Canopy of Necromancy in this volume alone. It was said that these spells had been lost for a long time, and that the necromancers of today had no way of grasping them. However, there were detailed records in this volume of necromancy magic. Han Shuo understood that he had picked up a priceless treasure this time. If this book of necromancy magic were to circulate, perhaps it would immediately change the current situation of necromancy mages, greatly increasing the strength of necromancy mages. The terror of necromancy mages would also reappear on the continent. After studying for almost 10 days, Han Shuo was either meditating or studying this volume of necromancy magic. Corpse Resurrection was a type of elementary spell, but it was a pity that Han Shuo couldn't practice it without a corpse. Canopy of Necromancy was already an advanced spell, and Han Shuo also couldn't practice it because his mental strength wasn't enough. However, Han Shuo did manage to grasp the spell Bone Spear through this period of training. He even seemed to be on the verge of mastering the spell Summon Zombie. It was just that there was a slight obstruction when communicating with the other dimension. Calculating the time, it should be about time that the Demon's Lair Edge was completed. Han Shuo thought for a bit and left the Cemetery of Death first. Together with Little Skull, they carefully avoided some level 3 and above magical beasts, hunted some low-level magical beasts, and carried them with them. They once again walked towards the dwarf village. Halfway through their journey, just as Han Shuo was about to enter the dwarf village, he heard the sound of weapons clashing. Han Shuo was shocked and suddenly increased his speed, shuttling through the bushes with Little Skull, heading straight for the source of the sound. Dozens of ogres and close to 100 goblins were holding weapons and attacking the dwarves from all sides. The dwarves had brand new weapons in their hands. Their weapons were much more advanced and sharper than those used by the ogres and goblins. In particular, The goblins were wielding simple knives, forks, and clubs, which broke into many pieces when they clashed with the dwarves' weapons. It was because of their advanced weapons that the dwarves, who were at a complete disadvantage in terms of numbers, had been able to hold out until now. Not far behind them was the dwarf village. There were women and children who had no fighting ability there. Therefore, for the safety of the village, they couldn't even retreat into the village, lest the women and children be exposed and endanger the safety of the women and children. When Han Shuo saw this scene, Han Shuo was instantly enraged. His crossbow was already in hand as he ran. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. A few crossbow bolts tore through the air as one ogre and two goblins were shot to death. Little Skull seemed to have sensed the anger in Han Shuo's heart. The 7 bone spurs on its back shot out in all directions as it dashed forward. Blood spurted out from the ogres' and goblins' bodies after a sharp whistle. "Oh, it's Han. He's here." Bennett raised his iron hammer and was surrounded by 5 or 6 goblins when he suddenly saw Han Shuo appear and cried out in surprise. Like a wolf in a flock of sheep, Han Shuo and Little Skull's arrival immediately brought about a bout of blood. Little Skull was especially valiant as its 7 bone spurs danced in the air within the group of ogres and goblins, causing large numbers of ogres and goblins to die. When Han Shuo arrived, he first summoned a few skeletal warriors. Each of them wielded bone knives as they charged at these villains. Han Shuo himself remained in place and targeted the dead ogres and goblins, starting to cast the spell Corpse Resurrection. After experiencing repeated failures, Han Shuo continued to chant magical incantations under the surprised gazes of the dwarves, attempting to make these corpses that had just lost their lives stand up again. Finally, an ugly goblin with a crossbow bolt in its chest suddenly stood up under Han Shuo's incantations. It wobbled as it held an iron rod and started attacking a living goblin next to it. With the experience of one success, Han Shuo calmly recalled the steps of the spell he'd just cast, and then cast the spell Corpse Resurrection again. Success again. This time, it was an ogre. Then, under the release of Han Shuo's Corpse Resurrection spell, another 5 or 6 ogres and goblins stood up and raised their weapons. They started attacking the living ogres and goblins next to them according to Han Shuo's orders. When these ogres and goblins discovered this phenomenon, they immediately fell into a great panic. When these ogres and goblins saw their dead companions stand up blankly and then attack them with weapons, they were frightened out of their wits. The remaining ogres and goblins used their native language to point at Han Shuo and say a few words in panic. All of them fled in all directions as if their lives depended on it. Even the dwarves next to them were a bit fearful. They looked at Han Shuo with very strange gazes, a bit different from usual. Han Shuo started and suddenly reacted. He undid the spell and the dead ogres and goblins fell back down with a loud thud. "Han Shuo, this spell of yours is too evil. We're all a bit scared when we see it." Bennett walked towards Han Shuo and stammered as he spoke. Han Shuo understood and knew that this kind of corpse resurrection spell was indeed very evil. Most people would find it hard to accept. Thinking for a bit, Han Shuo nodded and said, "Bennett, I understand what you mean, but I'm doing this because I want to save you guys." "We know, thank you, Han. However, this kind of magic is indeed too hard to accept." Even the ogres and goblins, these villains, were scared out of their wits by you. "Hehe, let's go. Your weapon is ready. We'll get it for you when we return to the village. Then I'm very grateful to you guys." Han Shuo was very surprised to hear that the Demon's Lair edge was ready. He followed behind Bennett and walked towards the dwarven village. The 7 bone spurs of the little skull returned to its spine and didn't follow Han Shuo to the dwarven village. Instead, it followed Han Shuo's orders and skillfully collected the items on the bodies of the dead. Following Calvin, Han Shuo arrived at the dwarven village. With Bennett leading the way, they arrived at the place where the Demon's Lair edge was forged. "Han Shuo, this is the weapon we forged according to your request. See if you're satisfied with it." Bennett pointed at the weapon beside him with the hammer in his hand and said to Han Shuo, "The Demon's Lair edge was 2 feet long, and its sharp edge sparkled with a faint cold light. Its entire body was dark brown, and its tip was as sharp as a tri-edged military knife. It was very heavy to hold in one's hand. Han Shuo held the demon's lair edge and examined it carefully. He then abruptly stabbed it into the whetstone below. With a poof, the entire demon's lair edge sank into the whetstone. Nodding, Han Shuo looked satisfactorily at the somewhat apprehensive Calvin and said with a slight smile, "Elder, thank you for your forging. I like this weapon very much." "Hehe, as long as you like it. I'm also very satisfied with this weapon that's a mixture of black iron and black gold, as well as 10 or so rare metals." Calvin heaved a sigh of relief and looked at the demon's lair edge. "You guys keep an eye out. Perhaps the ogres and goblins will appear again in the near future. I'll leave for a while first. When I come back next time, I'll bring your winter rations. You guys be careful." After repeatedly reminding the dwarves, Han Shuo impatiently returned to the Cemetery of Death and activated the magical yuan in his body. He used his essence blood as a primer to flow into the demon's lair edge. According to the memories left behind by Chu Kanglin, he continued to forge the demon's lair edge for 3 days and 3 nights. During this time, Han Shuo's magical yuan mixed with his essence blood slowly flowed into the demon's lair edge. After 3 days, Han Shuo was completely exhausted and felt that his magical yuan was somewhat depleted. However, the originally dark brown demon's lair edge had turned completely dark red. For the next few days, Han Shuo waited for his magical yuan to recover before using the demon's lair edge to practice the arts of controlling magic, attempting to control the demon's lair edge with his mind. During this process, Han Shuo's meridians would often swell painfully. On this day, relying on the enormous impact of the waterfall, Han Shuo gritted his teeth and continuously used his magical yuan to refine all the meridians in his body. Suddenly, his entire person sank into a trance. Without realizing it, Han Shuo slowly woke up and discovered that he had actually fallen into a deep pool at some unknown time. When Han Shuo walked out of the icy pool, he suddenly discovered that the demon's lair edge was missing. He was shocked and hurriedly tried to find the demon's lair edge. Just at this moment, a dark red light suddenly shot out from the pool and flew straight towards Han Shuo. Han Shuo thought that it was a dangerous attack and was about to dodge when he discovered that an indescribable feeling rose up in his heart. It was as if there was a faint connection between him and the dark red light that shot towards him. Han Shuo stared blankly for a moment before a thought flashed through his mind. The abruptly awakened Han Shuo's heart moved. The dark red light that had shot towards him suddenly danced in the air, according to Han Shuo's will. After that, Han Shuo sensed a swimming fish in the deep pool. A thought surfaced in his mind, and the fish was instantly pierced through by the demon's lair edge. "It looks like I've succeeded." Han Shuo opened his left hand, and the demon's lair edge shot out from the water and landed in the center of Han Shuo's palm with a whoosh. Under the circulation of the magical yuan, the speed of the mystical glacial spellfire was much faster than usual. Han Shuo was once again shocked and suddenly discovered that threads of cold air were leaking out from the demon's lair edge in his left hand under the infusion of the mystical glacial aura. Because the demon's lair edge was facing the deep pool, a layer of ice had already formed on the surface of the pool water that was emitting cold air. After the magical yuan had circulated around his body once, Han Shuo discovered to his surprise that the speed of the magical yuan flowing through his body was many times faster than usual. This was the case for all of the meridians in his body. There was no longer any feeling of stagnation anywhere. This made Han Shuo wildly excited. This was because he knew that this was the sign of breaking through to the channel opening stage and reaching the molded spirit stage. Han Shuo was gratified to know that after experiencing several life and death battles, as well as the sleepless days of magical training, he had finally broken through again. Now that Han Shuo's demonic arts had improved again and he'd obtained the demonic treasure, the demon's lair edge, Han Shuo felt that it was time to leave the Cemetery of Death and thoroughly eradicate the threat of Grover. Walking out from the cemetery in the back of the mountain, Han Shuo didn't immediately go find Phoebe. Instead, he thought of Fanny. Han Shuo admired Fanny from the bottom of his heart. After their last meeting, he had originally planned to ask her for guidance on magical knowledge. Unfortunately, because he had obtained the black gold or from Phoebe, he couldn't wait to return to the Cemetery of Death. There was a lot of knowledge in the first volume of Necromancy Magic that even Han Shuo wasn't clear on. This volume didn't have any notes yet. As an adept mage in the necromancy major, Phoebe should have a higher level of understanding. Therefore, Han Shuo had long since noted down the questions that he didn't understand and planned on taking the opportunity to ask Phoebe again. The Babylon Academy of Magic and Force had a lofty position in the Empire. Although Grover hated Han Shuo to the bone, he didn't dare openly make a move against Han Shuo within the academy. The strength of the teachers of each major was very strong. Apart from the necromancy major, the other majors had even stronger principles holding down the fort. Even if a shadow ghost assassin came, it was basically impossible for him to leave alive if he was discovered. It was now evening, and the students were relaxing and eating after a day of study. Han Shuo didn't directly go to the laboratory to find Fanny, afraid that he would attract the attention of others. Instead, he waited for a while until the sky was completely dark before he took advantage of the fact that no one was aware and walked towards the small building that Fanny lived in. Han Shuo had stayed in the necromancy major for so long, and because he especially admired Fanny, he had naturally long since found out where Fanny lived. Taking advantage of the dead of night, Han Shuo easily identified the direction and walked directly towards the teacher's dormitory that Fanny lived in. Chapter 81. Fanny's room was next to a few dark major female teachers, but there was still a bit of distance between them. His sensitive senses allowed Han Shuo to clearly hear the low sounds of conversation coming from the teachers' dormitories. It looked like none of them had fallen asleep yet. Every teacher of the Babylon Academy was an expert with extraordinary strength. Han Shuo purposefully concealed his presence as he approached, and even his heartbeat slowed considerably. Just as Han Shuo stood in front of Fanny's room and was about to extend a hand to knock on the door suddenly opened. Fanny was wearing a silk nightgown, revealing a patch of snow-white skin on her chest. She wore the ruby necklace that Han Shuo had given her, making her appear even more radiant and beautiful. "Brian, what are you sneaking over here for?" Fanny looked at Han Shuo with a bit of displeasure. Looking left and right, Han Shuo asked in surprise, how did you discover me?" "I felt like I've been followed recently, so I've been on guard. I released life detection in front of the door, so I discovered you as soon as you came over." Fanny rolled her eyes at Han Shuo and said unhappily when she saw Han Shuo look around furtively, Teacher Fanny, can I go in?" It wasn't convenient to stand at the door and talk. Add to that the fact that the teachers in the surrounding rooms weren't asleep yet. It wouldn't be good if they saw them. Who would have thought that Fanny's dainty cheeks would flush slightly red when Han Shuo said this? Fanny hesitated for a moment and also stuck her head out to look around. Only then did she drag Han Shuo in with a red face and hastily shut the door. Upon entering Fanny's room, Han Shuo discovered that the room was filled with a feminine aura. The pink bed curtains, clean and tidy tables, chairs, and carpets, as well as some elegant furnishings all indicated that the owner of the room was female. A thought suddenly struck Han Shuo as he remembered that in his original world, young girls wouldn't easily allow unfamiliar men into their rooms. Every girl's room was the window to her soul. If one didn't receive her approval, they absolutely wouldn't be able to enter. Han Shuo's heart rippled as he looked at Fanny with a fiery gaze. "What are you looking at? Where have you been these days? There will be a test in half a month. You must come and participate, otherwise the school has the right to expel you." Fanny glared fiercely when she saw Han Shuo's fiery gaze. She then thought of something and turned her back on Han Shuo, removing the ruby necklace from her pure white neck. "I understand. I've come to find you this time because I want to ask you for some magical knowledge." Why did you take off the necklace?" "I feel that you look quite beautiful with this necklace on." "None of your business. It's already nighttime. Of course I'm going to rest after taking off the necklace. If you want to ask for magical knowledge, come find me in the lab tomorrow during the day. It's already nighttime. It wouldn't be good if someone discovered you were here." Fanny looked unhappily at Han Shuo. Footsteps rang out from outside the door at this moment. After a while, the footsteps had arrived in front of Fanny's door. There were 2 knocks on the door and a girl's voice sounded, "Master Fanny, you're not asleep yet. Can I come in?" Fanny and Han Shuo glanced at each other, and both of their faces froze. Fanny then glared fiercely at Han Shuo and made a shushing gesture with her hand. She raised her voice, "Master Camilla, wait a moment. I'll open the door for you right away." Fanny suddenly began to walk around the room after speaking, her eyes continuously scanning the surroundings. It looked like she wanted to help Han Shuo find a place to hide. Fanny's room wasn't too large, and there didn't seem to be a place where Han Shuo's entire body could be hidden. In her anxiety, Fanny suddenly saw her bed and her face lit up with joy. She pointed at the bed to Han Shuo. Han Shuo saw that Fanny was so anxious and shrugged his shoulders. He followed Fanny's instructions and stood up from the side of the table, walking towards her bed with pink curtains. He climbed onto Fanny's bed with a whoosh, an expression of great enjoyment appearing on his face. Fanny had already walked to the door and was about to open it when she turned her head and was greatly startled. She mouthed soundlessly and pointed anxiously under the bed with her right hand. It looked like she wanted Han Shuo to hide under the bed, but who would have thought that Han Shuo would misunderstand and had already climbed onto the bed that no man had ever touched before. "Master Fanny, hurry up and open the door." Camilla stood in front of the door and saw that Fanny was at the door through the light. She opened her mouth to urge Fanny to open the door. Han Shuo was lying on his side on the bed, surrounded by the delicate fragrance of the bed. He ignored Fanny's anxious hints and smiled as he opened the curtains, covering himself with Fanny's fragrant thin blankets. Fanny ground her teeth in anger at Han Shuo's current actions, but Camilla kept urging her to open the door. Fanny had no choice but to open the door and pretend to be calm as she responded with a smile. "Master Camilla, why have you come to find me so late at night?" Camilla was an adept mage of the Dark Major. She was already middle-aged, and her looks could only be considered ordinary. When she walked into Fanny's room, she walked over to the table and sat down. She opened her mouth and said, "Your necromancy major actually suppressed the light major in the last Dark Forest trial. This gave us a lot of face. Our major will also be going out to train soon. I've come to ask you for some secrets." "What secrets?" It was pure luck that our necromancy major was able to hunt those magical creatures this time. "Master Camilla, you've been in the Dark Major for many years and have led students to train many times. You should have quite a bit of experience. I think you're asking the wrong person." Fanny kept feeling uneasy when she saw Camilla in the room. She was deathly afraid that she'd discover Han Shuo. The more worried she was, the more Fanny's gaze kept wandering around the edge of the bed, paying attention to the movements on her bed at all times. She was deathly afraid that Han Shuo would make some noise and attract Camilla's attention. "Master Fanny's bed curtains are very beautiful. Where did you buy them?" Camilla suddenly stood up and walked towards Fanny's bed unexpectedly. She kept her eyes on Fanny's bed curtains, and an expression of great interest appeared on her face. Her heart trembling, Fanny suddenly and quickly approached and walked towards the bed before Camilla did. She even sat down and blocked Camilla's line of sight with her body. She straightened her spine and hastily said, "I bought them from Mill Clothing Shop. If Master Camilla likes them, then go buy one as well. 1 gold coin is enough, Fanny's bed wasn't that big to begin with. Han Shuo was already tightly pressed against the wall as he lay on his side. Fanny was so anxious that she suddenly sat down on the bed and actually sat on the back of Han Shuo's left hand. Fanny explained to Camilla in the end. A soft was enough to indicate that Fanny also felt that something was amiss. "So you bought them from Mill Clothing Shop. No wonder they're so beautiful. It's a pity that I'm already of age and not as beautiful as Master Fanny. If I bought a curtain like this, I'd certainly be cursed at behind my back." Fanny's full bottom sat on the back of Han Shuo's hand. Han Shuo felt the wonderful sensation and his heart was like a monkey's gallop, not knowing what to do. Han Shuo was in the middle of enjoying the wonderful sensation when he suddenly felt that the wonderful sensation on the back of his left hand was gone. Disappointment rose in Han Shuo's heart, and he looked carefully to see that Fanny's body was still in a sitting position. It was just that her waist and abdomen had lifted her beautiful bottom slightly. The place where Fanny sat just so happened to block Camilla's line of sight. If Fanny moved, then Han Shuo behind her might be exposed. Fanny clearly felt that she was sitting where she shouldn't be. She couldn't move her body and could only lift her bottom to prevent Han Shuo from taking advantage of her. Han Shuo, who was watching from behind, could see the red flush on Fanny's neck, her fragrant shoulders, and beautiful back, as well as Fanny's full bottom that revealed her curves due to her tensed body. All of this fell into Han Shua's eyes. Han Shua didn't know what Fanny and Camilla talked about after that. His burning gaze roamed greedily over Fanny's body. As a mage, Fanny maintained the difficult horse stance. Fanny had already leapt onto the bed as soon as she'd finished speaking and began punching and kicking at Han Shua's punishment. Her little fists rained down on Han Shua's chest. As a mage, Fanny had no way of using her fists and feet to attack and cause any harm to Han Shua. However, when he saw the agitated Fanny's twin peaks jiggling as she waved her little fists and her long, snow-white thighs that were revealed because her dress had been lifted a bit after she'd gotten onto the bed, Han Shua was completely intoxicated. He first reached out his hand to stop her, then Han Shua couldn't contain his excitement and pushed Fanny down like a fever in his head. He used his strong body to completely press down on Fanny's well-rounded and perfect body, saying repeatedly, "Master Fanny, calm down, calm down." Han Shua yelled for Fanny to calm down, but pressed Fanny beneath him. His chest felt Fanny's firm twin peaks, his chest pressed tightly against Fanny. As Fanny struggled, the friction between their bodies caused Han Shua to gradually lose himself. Han Shua's face was completely red, and his eyes revealed a fiery light that made Fanny feel afraid. When Fanny couldn't move and was completely pressed under Han Shua's body, Fanny could only see Han Shua panting heavily. His eyes were red and filled with naked desire as he stared at her, but his mouth kept saying, "Calm down, calm down." Fanny couldn't help but feel angry. He was clearly more impulsive than anyone else, but he actually told her to calm down. Her hand was getting more and more painful, and she couldn't move no matter how she struggled. Fanny watched as Han Shua gradually approached, and her heart was filled with anxiety. She kept softly saying, "Damn it, hurry and stop, or I won't be polite." Chapter 82. With a ghastly howl, Han Shua clutched his lower body and moved away from Fanny's body. He curled his body with a pained expression, but his mind had completely returned to normal. Fanny sat up, straightened her clothes, and got off the bed as if nothing had happened. She glanced smugly at Han Shua and snorted lightly, "Well, now you know how strong I am." "Master Fanny, there's no need to be so vicious, is there?" Han Shua grimaced as he clutched his aching lower body. "Damn it, you still dare say that? It was fine last time in the pool, but this time you actually violated me again. This time you actually violated me again. I'm already letting you off easy by not killing you." Fanny was filled with rage when she thought of what had just happened and glared at Han Shua with a face full of rage. Han Shua rolled off the bed and sat down next to Fanny with a deadpan expression. He said calmly, "Let bygones be bygones. I'll recite a magic incantation for you." Fanny looked at Han Shua's serious demeanor and knew that he was purposefully trying to cover up what had just happened. She was about to open her mouth to yell at Han Shua when she suddenly heard Han Shua recite an incantation. Fanny didn't pay attention at first, but her face was filled with shock when she heard the last part. Her bright eyes sparkled with an indescribable light of excitement as she focused on Han Shua. Her voice trembled slightly as she asked, "This is necromancy magic. I can feel it. But why have I never known of such magic?" "This is the incantation for the Adept Magic Canopy of Necromancy. It's a necromancy magic that has been lost for many years. I obtained it by accident." Han Shua slowly explained when he saw Fanny's wild, joyful expression. "Just what is going on? Tell me clearly. Are there any other lost necromancy magic spells? Tell me quickly." Fanny, who had been immersed in necromancy magic, had long since forgotten her previous anger when she heard Han Shua recite the long-lost ancient incantation from his mouth. She hurriedly asked Han Shua about it. Heaving a sigh of relief in his heart, Han Shua thought calmly for a moment before nodding. "There's also an evil corpse resurrection spell that I stumbled upon. Master Fanny, you should understand that this is the lost magic of our necromancy major, so I need you to keep it a secret for now." Fanny was not stupid. When Han Shua said this, Fanny immediately understood what he meant. She nodded her head like a chick pecking at rice and kept urging Han Shuo with her eyes. Han Shuo then carefully described the incantations and gestures for corpse resurrection and canopy of necromancy to Fanny. He then took out some of the unsolved knowledge and started asking Fanny one by one. Fanny was overjoyed and had long since forgotten Han Shuo's rudeness towards her. She patiently explained the doubts that Han Shuo had encountered in detail. Han Shuo understood that he would be able to use these necromancy magic spells sooner or later. However, before his strength was sufficient, Han Shuo didn't plan on letting others know that he had obtained these secrets. Fanny was an adept mage of the necromancy major and the target of Han Shuo's admiration. Add to that the fact that Han Shuo knew that Fanny was a hard-mouthed but kind person and was very concerned about him. He didn't plan on keeping it a secret. After all, there were some magical knowledge that Han Shuo had to ask Fanny in order to comprehend. Unknowingly, Han Shuo stayed in Fanny's room and chatted until late at night. Fanny, who was previously excited, started to yawn continuously. When she discovered that it was already late at night, Fanny reached out to cover her mouth and yawned. She said lazily to Han Shuo, "It's getting late. I'm going to rest. I've explained all these questions to you. You should go back to the dorms and rest." "Oh, that's right. You haven't stayed in the dorms that I've arranged for you, have you?" Nodding, Han Shuo got up and walked towards the door. Just as Han Shuo was about to push open the door and leave, Fanny suddenly opened her mouth and said, "Brian, don't think that I've forgotten the bad things that you've done to me. However, if you can study hard and graduate from the necromancy major a bit faster, maybe I'll forgive you." Han Shuo was stunned and stopped at the door. He turned around to see Fanny looking at him with anticipation. Fanny's expression was solemn as she said seriously, "Brian, with your talent, this isn't a difficult matter. As long as you're willing to work hard, you'll definitely become a very powerful necromancer and obtain everything that you want." "Does that include Master Fanny?" Han Shuo subconsciously opened his mouth to ask. Fanny's heart suddenly trembled as she looked at Han Shuo looking at her with a dazed expression. Her cheeks suddenly flushed red, and she flew into a rage out of humiliation. She yelled out, "Get out! Hurry up and scram! You lecherous bad boy!" His heart filled with joy. Han Shuo felt that Fanny seemed to be a bit interested in him. From their recent conversations, Han Shuo felt that Fanny had high hopes for him. After careful consideration, Han Shuo suddenly realized that it wasn't realistic for him to obtain Fanny's affection with his current strength and status. "Don't worry, I'll work hard. You'll see very soon." Pausing in front of the door, Han Shuo spoke in a low voice and left in the darkness. After leaving Fanny's room, Han Shuo didn't return to the dormitory that Fanny had arranged for him. This was because there were people watching the door to the dormitory, and the rooms inside were close to each other. Han Shuo didn't want to be discovered by others in order to avoid attracting the attention of Shadow Ghost and Grover, especially when Han Shuo had heard Fanny mention that she felt as if someone was following her. This made Han Shuo even more vigilant, and he didn't dare easily expose himself in front of others. He thought to himself that it looked like he should buy a residence outside of the school, or else he wouldn't even have a place to stay when he returned to the Empire. If he had his own private residence, then he wouldn't have to go to the cemetery behind the academy to activate the magical matrix every time. Just as Han Shuo was silently thinking and walking to the side of the dark major library, he suddenly heard the sound of pages flipping. This made Han Shuo's heart abruptly jump, and he immediately and soundlessly hid himself in the shadows of a corner around the library. With a slight movement of his neck, the 3 original demons flew out soundlessly and snuck into the library in the middle of the night. 2 figures held a weak light in their hands, and Han Shuo saw 2 familiar faces under the dim light. Old Mage Duke and Senior Swordsman Eric. Han Shuo had obtained the green ball to open the Cemetery of Death from these 2, when he had been in the cemetery behind the necromancy major. The confident Eric had thought that Han Shuo would die without a doubt if he struck out with a sword filled with fighting aura, which was why he hadn't examined Han Shuo's body. Han Shuo hadn't thought that he would be able to see these 2 again after a few months in the Dark Major's library. Be careful, there are many strong characters in this Babylon Academy of Magic and Force. Don't alarm others, or we'll be in big trouble. Duke saw that Eric's movements were too large, and immediately admonished him softly. I still haven't discovered anything. There aren't any records of the Eye of Darkness in some of the Necromancy Major's books. Eric's movements were a bit more gentle as he complained lowly. The Eye of Darkness is the key to opening the Cemetery of Death. We spent a lot of effort to obtain it, but didn't think that it would suddenly disappear without a trace. When Dylan died last time, the item wasn't on his body anymore. We went back and searched his place but didn't find anything. It's very strange why the item would suddenly disappear. The Babylon Academy of Magic and Force has many books in the Necromancy Major. Perhaps we'll be able to find some clues. Otherwise, we won't be able to bear the consequences if the higher-ups blame us. Duke glared hatefully at Eric and said lowly. Han Shuo, who was outside, had clearly observed the conversation and expressions of the two with the help of the original demon spying. He finally understood that the ball he controlled was called the Eye of Darkness. It looked like the two had the same intentions as him when they explored the Dark Major's library at night, and wanted to search for the secrets of the Eye of Darkness in the library. The two came up empty-handed after a while and left the library dejectedly. I've come to find Miss Phoebe. Han Shuo stood in front of the door and said softly, Please wait a moment. The person inside responded as another set of footsteps quickly left. 2 sets of footsteps could be heard after a short while. Is that Brian? Fabian's voice sounded from the other side of the door. It's me, Han Shuo responded. Breathing a sigh of relief, Fabian instructed, Open the door. It is indeed Brian. The door opened and 2 swordsmen wearing silver armor stood on either side of Fabian. The lines on their faces were rough, with traces of being exposed to the elements for many years. They looked like 2 skilled fighters. Hurry and come in. I haven't seen you for another 10 days. Phoebe always mentions you in front of me. She says that with you by her side, with your extraordinary reflexes, we can save a lot of trouble. Although a smile hung on Fabian's face, he still appeared a bit exhausted. It looks like you haven't been doing too well lately. The last time I was here, the security wasn't as tight as it is now. Han Shuo swept his gaze over Fabian and opened his mouth to tease him. Sighing lightly, Fabian said, Don't mention it. Miss Phoebe has already been assassinated 3 times in the 10 days since we returned from the banquet. Each time is more dangerous than the last. These people are from the Battlefire mercenary band, and Miss Phoebe spent a great deal of money to invite them over. However, 3 of them have been injured and 2 have died in the past few days. It looks like Grover is starting to get anxious. It's just that we're in more and more danger now. Han Shuo felt 2 mages and 1 warrior in the surrounding corners as he walked towards the hall where the speaker was speaking. Their strength seemed to be quite impressive. With so many experts protecting them and Phoebe's strength as a swordmaster, it looked like Grover and Shadow Ghost were indeed quite frightening with so many casualties. The 3 original demons once again soundlessly flew out from the back of Han Shuo's neck and avoided the boundaries set up by the Battlefire mercenary band. They concealed themselves in 3 different directions on the roof and silently observed everything around them. After a while, Phoebe walked in with a tall, beautiful woman with fiery red hair and a ponytail. This woman had bronze skin and a tall, muscular, and beautiful figure. She had a large chest, butt, and body, and a broadsword on her back. She looked like a swordsman. Brian, I finally see you again. How wonderful. Phoebe looked at Han Shuo with pleasant surprise. Phoebe, this is the amazing Brian that you've been talking about? The muscular woman with fiery red hair looked at Han Shuo with a face full of suspicion as she spoke. Yes, Candace. Let me see if he's as amazing as you say. Candace snorted lightly and drew the broadsword on her back, slashing fiercely at Han Shuo. When the broadsword was drawn, red flames spread to the entire broadsword like a fire dragon. It looked like she was a magical swordsman. Chapter 83. Han Shuo never would have thought that this girl would make a move as soon as she said so. She didn't even give him a chance to say another word. Before the broadsword neared his body, the scorching temperature was already making his skin feel a bit uncomfortable. Snorting coldly, the demon's lair edge suddenly appeared in Han Shuo's left hand. Han Shuo imbued it with magical yuan and activated it using the mystical glacial spellfire method. The dark red demon's lair edge suddenly emitted a faint purple cold air, and the temperature in the room suddenly changed. Candace's side was scorching hot, while Han Shua's side was eerily cold. The two swords in their hands hadn't yet met when the hot and cold auras had already met. Wisps of white smoke rippled out. However, what astonished Phoebe was that Han Shua's purple cold air was different from any ice magic she'd seen before. It was like a living creature, and could even bend as it advanced. When Han Shua's and Candace's swords collided, a ferocious force mixed with fighting aura crashed onto Han Shua's demon's lair edge like a hammer. Han Shua's body staggered back a few steps, but when his fighting aura surged into the demon's lair edge, he found it difficult to move an inch. He had no way of breaking through the demon's lair edge's obstruction and harming Han Shua. Candace, on the other hand, suddenly cried out loudly. When the white smoke dissipated, Han Shua looked at Candace again and discovered that the broadsword in her hand had a chip on it. It looked like it had been cut by the demon's lair edge. Candace should have the strength of a senior swordsman, and because she also possessed fire magic, her strength was even more unfathomable. The broadsword in her hand should be an exceedingly high-quality magic sword, and had the effect of amplifying the fusion of fire magic. Who would have thought that such a good sword would be damaged by Han Shua in an instant? Just as Candace looked at the broadsword in her hand with a face full of shock and anger, seemingly planning on continuing to attack Han Shua, Phoebe, who was standing to the side, suddenly spoke up. "All right, Candace, Brian's forte isn't brute force. I've already said that his miraculous abilities come from his extraordinary senses. He destroyed my magic sword." Candace glared at Han Shua before complaining to Phoebe. "Serves you right. You asked for it. If you don't change your reckless temper, you'll suffer a lot in the future." Phoebe flicked a helpless glance at Candace and advised with good intentions. Her beautiful eyes swept over Han Shua and focused on the demon's lair edge in Han Shua's hands. Phoebe revealed an extremely interested expression and exclaimed, "Is this the weapon you want to forge? Can I take a look?" "There's nothing to look at. It's just a bit sharper than ordinary weapons." Han Shua put away the demon's lair edge without batting an eyelid and smiled at Phoebe. "Humph, petty." Phoebe exclaimed softly and then pointed at Candace, introducing her to Han Shua. "This is the vice chief of the Battlefire Mercenary Band, Candace. She's a friend I knew in the past. Her temper is a bit brash, but she's actually a good person. Don't mind her." Nodding, Han Shua flicked a glance at Candace and said with a smile, "I don't mind. I just hope she doesn't hate me. Heh. It's just a magic sword, not to mention that it hasn't been completely damaged. I won't be so petty. Phoebe, you guys discuss your private matters. I'll guard the door for you outside. I hope that damned Grover knows his place." Candace glared disdainfully at Han Shua and then looked at the broadsword in her hands with a face full of heartache, walking outside with large strides. As he watched Candace walk out of the room, Han Shua felt that although this girl's temper was a bit brash, she wasn't a petty or hateful person. Otherwise, she wouldn't have left so easily. "I've come this time to buy some rations from you, and also to ask you to help me find a secluded place to live. It doesn't have to be a large place, as long as it's guaranteed that no one will discover it." Han Shua didn't mince his words as he looked at Phoebe and went straight to the point. "No problem. How much food do you need?" Phoebe was quite straightforward and didn't put it off at all. She first agreed and then asked about the amount of food. "About 100 people, enough to support a winter's worth of rations," Han Shua responded. When these words were spoken, Phoebe looked at Han Shua with an odd expression. When Han Shua felt uneasy all over, Phoebe finally said in confusion, "What do you want to do?" "A winter's worth of rations for 100 people. Are you planning on leaving the Empire?" Shaking his head with a rueful smile, Han Shua knew that she would be suspicious. He said, "Don't think too much. I'm helping a friend resolve some difficult problems. I won't be leaving the Empire in the short term if I don't eliminate Grover. There's no problem with the rations, but you'll have to give me a few days to prepare. Also, a secluded place to live. I'd advise you not to live alone outside for the time being because Grover and the people from Shadow Ghost have always viewed you as a thorn in their side. If I help you find a place to live, perhaps Grover will find some clues. If you don't mind, you can live here temporarily. That way, we can look out for each other. When Grover's threat has been eliminated, this house can be left to you, and we can return to the Buzzed Merchant Guild. What do you think? Phoebe thought for a moment and looked directly at Han Shuo. Hearing Phoebe's words, Han Shuo thought carefully and felt that there was some truth to her words. However, Han Shuo was a bit hesitant to take this residence. After all, even if the threat of Grover was eliminated, Shadow Ghost was still an enormous assassin organization. Whether it's his skills, the strange sword in his hand, or even his identity and origins, they all seem quite odd. I think he's certainly hiding a secret behind him. You'd best be on your guard against him. I'm not asking you these things. I already know these things and don't need you to remind me. I just want to ask how he is. Phoebe's voice was odd as she opened her mouth again. Humph. And you say you're just a normal friend to him? I don't think you care so much about friends. This person's looks aren't bad, but he's not handsome either. I haven't had any contact with other people, but according to what you've said, he doesn't seem to be much. Being greedy for money and power doesn't seem to have any merits. Han Shuo heard every word of their conversation and was cursing Candace inwardly when the 3 original demons that had been released in the distance suddenly sensed the approach of the assassins. There were 10 assassins in this wave, and the leader was dressed in black. His body floated in midair and looked to be an archmage. Through the vision of the original demons, Han Shuo saw that Grover had also appeared in the distance. Grover had a nervous and cautious expression on his face. Ellis and the other experts that had always followed him had all moved out this time. It looked like Grover was staking everything on one throw and was planning on making it difficult for Phoebe to escape with this wave. The 3 original demons slowly changed their direction according to Han Shuo's thoughts, carefully avoiding the coverage of the Archmage's mental strength and carefully probing the strength and number of people coming. It was the wee hours of the night, and the guards of the heavily guarded northern part of the city would change shifts at this time. This would take a few minutes, and the northern part of the city would be the most relaxed at this time. It looked like the newcomers had already thoroughly investigated the situation here. Han Shuo gauged the strength of the people on this side, and for the first time, a feeling of disaster rose up in his heart. He could no longer continue listening to Phoebe and Candace's conversation at this time. He walked out of the room as fast as he could and kicked open the door to Phoebe's room, disregarding the taboo and directly barging into her room. Chapter 84. What are you doing? Candace's face turned pale with fright as she suddenly stood up. On the other side, Phoebe seemed to have been about to undress and get ready for bed. She also jumped in fright when she saw Han Shuo rush over and hastily pulled up her clothes, looking at Han Shuo with a face full of panic. Grover's men and Shadow Ghost's men have arrived together. Don't waste words and think of a way to deal with them. Han Shuo's face was dark as he growled lowly at the 2 frantic women. Candace still had some doubts when these words left her mouth and was about to express her confusion when Phoebe's face turned grave as she yelled, "Candace, listen to him. Brian wouldn't make a mistake." Candace didn't believe Han Shuo, but she did believe Phoebe. When she heard Phoebe's words, she immediately drew the broadsword from her back and nodded at Phoebe. Like a ball of fire, she suddenly rushed out. Candace's low voice of warning immediately sounded from outside the room. Phoebe didn't waste words either as she casually grabbed a robe from the side of the bed and put it on. Her space ring suddenly flashed, and a long sword flashing with cold light appeared in Phoebe's hand. Nodding at Phoebe, Han Shuo quickly made his way outside the room and saw Candace standing outside, giving instructions in a low voice. Relying on the vision of the original demons, Han Shuo closed his eyes and suddenly opened his mouth. 3 people are approaching 100 meters to the left. 2 warriors and a mage. The mage is the wind adept mage Ellis. There's an archmage leading 4 warriors and an archer in front of them. They're 130 meters away from here and are moving stealthily from the rooftops. They should be Shadow Ghost's men. There's a few people hiding in an alley 50 meters to the right, and they seem to be setting up a trap. Han Shuo closed his eyes and continuously described the positions of the swiftly approaching people in detail, as if he was personally in the midst of the battle. Candace didn't quite believe it at first. She wouldn't believe it even if she were beaten to death that he could so clearly detect human movements from so far away. However, as soon as Phoebe walked out of the room, she immediately followed Han Shuo's description and asked Candace to arrange for people to defend. Miss Phoebe, I hope you are prepared to retreat this time. Based on my estimation, I think that even with you as a swordsman, we might not be their match. If the situation is not good, I hope you will not stay here. But no matter how dangerous it is, don't retreat to the right, that's a dead end. Han Shuo suddenly opened his eyes and stared at Phoebe as he spoke solemnly. Thank you, Brian. I know what to do. You have to be careful too. Phoebe trusted Han Shuo quite a bit. When she saw Han Shuo warn her so solemnly, she immediately understood that this time would be extremely dangerous. She immediately nodded solemnly to express her understanding. Taking a deep breath, Han Shuo took out the demon's lair edge and held it in his hand. He inspected the dagger hidden on his body and the steel needle in his leg. He then held the crossbow in his left hand and leapt onto a large tree nearby. The shadows of the house perfectly concealed Han Shuo's body. Han Shuo stared at the left side with a solemn and calm expression, not moving an inch. They're here indeed. Everyone, spread out carefully. As a swordsman, Phoebe finally heard the footsteps and rejoiced at her trust in Han Shuo. She cast a meaningful glance at Candace beside her. It was only now that Candace looked in shock at Han Shuo, who was hidden in the darkness. She never would have thought that Han Shuo would be so amazing. Not only could he detect people's movements from a distance of 100 meters, but it was as if he had a pair of eyes in the sky and could clearly detect the enemy's movements. Candace was a seasoned mercenary after all. After a brief moment of shock, she glanced at Phoebe and the two leapt up at the same time, hiding on either side of Han Shuo and also hiding in the shadows. Boo. Brian, can you slowly inform me of the enemy's movements so that I can tell the people below to be careful? Candace was a meter away from Han Shuo and said softly. Maintaining this posture, even his expression didn't change. Han Shuo's voice was low as he faintly described the enemy's movements in detail. Candace held a magical tool in her hand and used it to give instructions to the mercenaries lying in ambush in other directions in the yard. The three people on Grover's side, led by Ellis, were the first to arrive. They stopped on a rooftop to the side. Han Shuo and the others didn't make a move until the archmage hovering in the air appeared in front of the front door with a few shadow ghost experts. Only then did they hold their breaths and prepare to act at a moment's notice. The archmage didn't see how he moved. All that could be seen was that he, completely shrouded in a black robe, used an almost inaudible voice to chant a few incantations. Strong magical pulses suddenly emanated from the surroundings of Phoebe's residence, and then all the rooms began to shake violently as if a great earthquake had occurred. At the same time, the four warriors behind him quickly spread out. An archer retreated to the roof of a nearby building and surveyed the surroundings from above. Ellis saw the earth shake violently like a giant beast awakening and nodded to the two warriors in front of him. The two of them leapt down and landed in the yard below. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. 5 arrows suddenly revealed themselves in the darkness. They were like 5 ruthless poisonous snakes lurking in the depths of a deep pond, quickly biting towards the 2 warriors who had just landed. It looked like because of this person's death, the composure they'd been maintaining had completely vanished. Phoebe and Candace shot their crossbow bolts at the same time, flying towards the Earth Archmage who'd released the Earth Dragons. The two's crossbow bolts had a powerful momentum, but the Archmage waved his left hand and a wall suddenly rose from the ground. The two's crossbow bolts hit the wall and didn't cause any damage to the killer. In the shadow of the tree, Ellis didn't hide his voice again and suddenly spoke in his original voice. The whistling of wind blades sounded along with his voice. Phoebe and Candace immediately jumped out from Han Shuo's side when they heard the sound of the wind blades. Phoebe wielded a long sword that shone with dazzling light as she charged towards the Archmage with the fastest speed possible. Candace's broadsword rose into the sky with tongues of flame, making Candace look like a fire elf in the darkness as she quickly closed in on Ellis. Han Shuo held his crossbow and didn't move as he hid in the shadow of the tree. He didn't even make a move to block the oncoming wind blades. A few wind blades sliced through tree branches, and two of them landed on Han Shuo's waist. However, Han Shuo grit his teeth and held on. He didn't move at all, and even his breathing and heartbeat were maintained at an astonishingly steady level. Phoebe and Candace's flight from the tree had thoroughly ignited the flames of battle. Because the Earth Archmage had caused the entire house to collapse with a large earthquake, many of the traps set up by the Battlefire mercenary band had been rendered ineffective. Phoebe knew very well how frightening an Archmage was, so she set her sights on the Archmage and immediately attacked with all her might. When Phoebe moved, two of the senior swordsmen from Shadow Ghost immediately joined up with the Archmage. They faced Phoebe with a combination of 2 fighters and 1 mage. In the distance, an archer from Shadow Ghost, along with 2 other swordsmen and Ellis, started attacking the people from the Battlefire mercenary band. Candace, wielding her broadsword, created a tongue of flame with every swing. The broadsword blossomed with an eye-catching light in the dark night, forcing the wind mage Ellis to continuously retreat. Ellis, borrowing the power of the wind, was nimble. As he rapidly retreated, he sent tornadoes of wind blades towards Candace. When a journeyman swordsman from Shadow Ghost arrived in front of Ellis and joined forces with him to deal with Candace, the originally awe-inspiring Candace suddenly seemed a bit strained. At this moment, whether it was Phoebe's side, Ellis, or the people from Shadow Ghost, they were all exposed in the damaged yard. Han Shuo was the only one present, still hidden in the darkness. He endured the 2 wind blades and waited for the most opportune moment to attack. Similarly, at a disadvantage, Phoebe and Candace saw that Han Shuo had yet to make an appearance and couldn't help but feel a bit of anticipation in their dejected hearts. The 2 girls were both intelligent and had already guessed what Han Shuo was planning by hiding there at the risk of being injured. They both understood tacitly and led their opponents towards the direction of the large tree. After a while, Phoebe and Candace, who were struggling to fight their enemies, gathered under the tree where Han Shuo was hiding. They were blocked off by the Archmage, Ellis, and the others. "Beautiful Miss Phoebe, after a few battles, I greatly admire your strength. But this time, you won't have any more chances. I'm very sorry." Ellis laughed softly. As soon as he finished speaking, the wind howled in the air in front of him, forming a violent tornado. The broken trees and rocks in the surroundings were all blown into the air by the tornado and swept towards Phoebe and Candace. The Archmage didn't make a sound and raised his left hand, for tall earthen walls rose from the ground, completely trapping Phoebe and Candace like a cage. The long sword in Phoebe's hand rippled with a ball of piercing milky white light. The light formed the shape of a cross and blasted through a wall of earth, leaping out together with Candace. At this moment, the swordsmen who had been waiting on the side immediately made their moves to deal with Phoebe and Candace. Ellis had a sinister smile on his face as he gathered his mental strength and slowly manipulated the tornado to engulf the 2. At this moment, a crossbow bolt pierced through the air and suddenly shot towards the Earth Archmage, who was completely shrouded in a black robe. The Archmage leaned to the side and a swordsman next to him blocked the bolt with a wave of his hand. At this moment, a bone spear appeared out of thin air and also shot towards the Archmage with a sharp whistle. The Archmage seemed to be a bit impatient as he opened his left hand slightly and earth element magic gathered. A stone slab flew out of the ground and smashed the bone spear flying towards him. The Archmage had just breathed a sigh of relief and was about to search for the enemy hiding in the shadows when a ghastly howl suddenly sounded. Ellis clutched his chest not far away and raised his head to look at the large tree above his head in terror. A sharp weapon drilled out like a poisonous dragon and whistled out of his chest. An arrow of blood uncontrollably spurted out from the bloody hole in Ellis' chest. Ellis' head faced the sky as his knees suddenly gave way and he knelt on the ground. He then paused and his body fell backwards. Chapter 85. Ella's sudden death caused the concealed Han Shuo to be completely exposed. When the demon's lair edge made an arc and returned to Han Shuo's hand, Han Shuo also leapt down from the tree. At this moment, the Thunder Journeyman Mage of the Battlefire Mercenary Band had an arrow lodged in his left ribs at some point. It looked like he'd been shot by the archer from Shadow Ghost on the distant rooftop. The other senior swordsman was also spitting up fresh blood. His body also seemed to have been slashed by wind blades as drops of fresh blood dripped to the ground from his body. "Get out of here." Han Shuo landed and sized up the situation. He understood that even though Ellis had been ambushed and killed, his side was still at a disadvantage. He immediately made the decision to retreat. From the arrival of the group of killers until the wave of attacks just now, everything had actually happened in the time it took for sparks to fly off a flint. The killers from Shadow Ghost still had plenty of time to slowly kill his group before the city guards had finished changing shifts, especially when the original demons that Han Shuo had set up in the distance detected that the people who had set up the trap earlier were also rushing over. He naturally understood that his side would have even less of a chance of victory when they arrived. Phoebe and Candace's beautiful eyes had already sparkled when they heard Han Shuo's decision to retreat. They seemed to have started considering the route of retreat. Before the two girls could decide, Han Shuo's thoughts raced as he suddenly thought of a place. A mischievous smile appeared on his face, and he suddenly opened his mouth. "Follow me." Han Shuo's body abruptly dashed towards the wall of a collapsed house. The demon's lair edge flew out of his hand like a venomous dragon drill, and a large hole suddenly opened up with a violent explosion. Han Shuo caught the demon's lair edge after coming over and had already dashed out of the hole. Phoebe and Candace were right next to Han Shuo and were the closest to the hole in the back. After Han Shuo's body moved, the two beauties didn't waste any time. They also flew over, and in the blink of an eye, they broke through the big hole and escaped. When the remaining two mercenaries from Warfire saw that Candace and Phoebe had left, they looked at each other and also began to flee in two different directions. "Don't worry about the others. Go after those two women." Only at this moment did the black-robed archmage suddenly speak. His voice was extremely sharp and unpleasant to the ears. Therefore, all the assassins gave up on the two wounded and quickly darted into the hole under the archmage's orders, chasing after Han Shuo's trio. Han Shuo, who had cultivated demonic arts, was extremely fast as he flew. The two beauties, Phoebe and Candace, who were also warriors, didn't lag behind either. They didn't care about anything else and only focused on chasing after Han Shuo. One of the original demons had long since snuck onto Han Shuo's path. With an extra pair of eyes, Han Shuo weaved through the alleys and courtyards, choosing remote places to escape to. With the existence of the original demon, Han Shuo could see everything clearly and wouldn't get lost at all. Slowly, Han Shuo's group of three actually used the terrain to shake off their pursuers. A fork in the road suddenly appeared in front of them. One path led in an even more winding direction, while the other path was much more spacious. There weren't many places to hide in the middle. Phoebe and Candace followed a few steps behind Han Shuo and were extremely shocked at Han Shuo's familiarity with the terrain. They watched with wide eyes as Han Shuo actually used his familiarity with the terrain to pull away from the assassins behind them. When the fork in the road appeared in front of them, the two naturally thought that Han Shuo would charge into the more winding path and take the opportunity to shake off their pursuers. They didn't think that Han Shuo would suddenly stop and casually take out a black mask to cover his face. He even tossed two to Phoebe and Candace, hurriedly instructing, "Put it on." Candace was hesitating when Phoebe had already put on the mask without another word, completely covering her beautiful face. Seeing that the pursuers had already appeared at the corner of the street, Phoebe's little mouth behind the mask suddenly urged Candace, "Hurry up." Candace didn't hesitate any longer when Phoebe spoke up and hastily put on the mask. She then took out a set of black night clothes from her space ring and seemed to be planning on putting them on as well. "No need to wear black clothes, let's go." Han Shuo suddenly spoke and looked at the pursuers behind him. His body, which had paused for a few seconds, moved once again and actually missed another quiet and winding path, running towards another wide and unobstructed road instead. Even Phoebe was startled, not understanding what Han Shuo meant by doing this. However, this wasn't the time to ask. Based on her trust in Han Shuo, Phoebe lightly pulled on Candace and decisively ran after Han Shuo. Don't rush at full speed. We need to let the people behind us see our tracks. Han Shuo lowered his body a bit and was almost shoulder to shoulder with Phoebe and Candace as he spoke in a low voice to the two girls. What the hell are you doing? If we hadn't stopped and had taken the path just now, I think we would have escaped already. Why did you go to the trouble of covering your face with a mask? They know that our clothes are useless and will only make us look like idiots. Candace complained. Heh, I didn't cover my face with a mask to hide it from them. I just didn't want the other group to see our faces. When I came yesterday, I discovered another group of sneaky people in a house in front of us. These people are also very strong, and their secretive ways of doing things are definitely not good. If the people from Shadow Ghost meet them, I think something will definitely happen. Perhaps we can also take care of the danger of Shadow Ghost in one go. Han Shuo used a sinister voice to explain simply. You're so despicable. Candace was stunned and immediately spoke up. Brian, we can't bring danger to innocent people. Are you sure they're not good people? Phoebe was startled and asked Han Shuo. Don't worry, I'm sure they're not good people. I even saw them sneaking into our Babylon Academy to steal things yesterday. How could they be good people with that kind of way of doing things? Han Shuo assured Phoebe and then suddenly said in a low voice, Pay attention, it's the courtyard in front of us. I'll attack from long range in a moment, and then we'll immediately flash to the back of that courtyard. We must not expose our tracks no matter what. Suddenly increasing their speed, Han Shuo, Phoebe, and Candace quickly rushed towards a courtyard in front of them. When they reached the front door, Han Shuo suddenly took out his crossbow and fired an arrow without aiming. He also took out a steel needle and threw it into the courtyard. After doing all this, Han Shuo pulled Phoebe and Candace to a hiding place that the original demons had long since chosen, a square, lidless stone box that was piled with trash behind the house. Oh, it stinks. Candace immediately covered her nose and exclaimed softly as soon as she entered. Phoebe also covered her nose, her eyes filled with disgust and discomfort. The place was very narrow, and there were even a few trash bags piled up. Han Shuo crouched in the middle with Phoebe and Candace crouching on either side of Han Shuo. The three bodies were pressed together, and Candace and Phoebe could smell the stench. Han Shuo naturally couldn't avoid it either, and could only use the mask on his face to block his nose. Han Shuo didn't say anything and used his hand to make a shushing gesture at the two, indicating that they should speak less and pay attention to the surroundings. There's an enemy. A low cry sounded from within the courtyard, and then light footsteps sounded from within, seeming to be searching for traces of the newcomers. At this moment, Han Shuo, Phoebe, and Candace crouched there and saw the Archmage hovering in the air in the distance, hurrying over with a few assassins from Shadow Ghost. They've gone in. It's this courtyard. A swordsman immediately began reporting to the Archmage when he arrived. The black-robed Archmage nodded and waved the magic staff covered by his left sleeve. A strong magical ripple once again appeared. The earthquake spell that had appeared in Phoebe's house once again appeared in this courtyard. House after house collapsed with the release of the Archmage earthquake spell. Chaotic curses suddenly sounded from inside. Duke, Eric, and a few other people in the courtyard didn't say a word as their fighting aura surged and their magic shot out, raining down on the black-robed Archmage. Duke was also hovering in the air. He was actually an Archmage as well. Hundreds of wind blades formed into a tornado as he completed his wind magic incantation, sweeping towards the black-robed Archmage and the others. The tornado formed from the wind blades was incredibly powerful and sent sand and rocks flying everywhere it passed. Several small trees in its path fell into it and were immediately broken into splinters. Damn it, why is there an Archmage here? Grover didn't tell us. A sharp cry of surprise came from the black-robed Archmage's mouth. He deployed a wall of earth in front of him and quickly retreated. The swordsman from Grover's group and the archer from Shadow Ghost were caught off guard and were both pulled in by the violent tornado. Following a series of shrill cries, the flesh and blood of the two splattered everywhere. Then, they were covered in a bloody mist, and not long after, they lost all signs of life. After them, Duke coldly snorted and led Eric and a few others out of the ruined courtyard. They chased after the shadow ghost that had already started to escape. Along the way, magic continued to collide, and the sound of explosions rang out continuously. Where did these people come from? They're so strong. Candace murmured with a face full of surprise after they'd left. This courtyard has become ruins again, and there's no one inside. We don't need to stay here anymore. Phoebe hastily jumped out from within and distanced herself from the stone box that contained the trash. After Candace and Han Shua walked out, Han Shua said with a light smile, "The city guards should have finished changing in at this time. I wonder if these two groups of people will alarm the city guards." "You're sinister, all right. What should we do next?" Candace had unknowingly taken Han Shua to be her pillar of support at this moment. Seeing that the danger had been averted and that Han Shua had brought enormous trouble to Shadow Ghost and Grover's men, she couldn't help but continue asking Han Shua questions. "Miss Phoebe, I think I might be able to find out where Grover's mistress is." Han Shua suddenly spoke up at this moment. Wild joy appeared on her face as Phoebe stared at Han Shua with a face full of excitement and asked urgently, "Where is she? Come with me. It looks like we won't be able to rest tonight." Han Shua shrugged his shoulders helplessly and identified the direction. He led the way through the wide road and walked towards a dark and narrow alley. Grover had appeared from the very beginning. After Ellis and Shadow Ghost, men had charged into Phoebe's house, Grover had stayed in a house in the distance and waited for news. One of the three original demons had remained at Grover's place to keep an eye on him. Grover only left on his own when Phoebe's house had collapsed. He didn't return to the buzzed merchant guild, but instead boarded a carriage that had been arranged beforehand and said to the coachman, "Go to where Carol lives, be careful." Han Shua had heard Phoebe say last time that Grover's mistress was called Carol, so he'd informed Phoebe and Candace. If the three original demons were too far away from Han Shua, it would be very difficult to control. When Grover had left, Duke had just made contact with the people from Shadow Ghost. As Grover's carriage sped along, Han Shua found it more and more difficult to control the original demons. Phoebe and Candace immediately approached Grover with all their might as soon as they agreed. When the sky had just begun to brighten, Han Shua brought Phoebe and Candace to the streets in the west of the city. Compared to the north and south of the city, this place appeared dirty and messy. There was trash everywhere on the road, and a few beggars wore thin clothing in such cold weather. They curled up in the surrounding trash piles, seeming to want to use the trash bags to obtain a trace of warmth. Who would have thought that with Grover's identity, he would come to these slums? He hid his mistress here. No wonder we couldn't find her. Grover isn't an easy person to deal with, all right. Phoebe furrowed her brow as she looked around and said to Han Shua in a low voice, "All right, this should be the place. Come with me. I don't think Grover can escape this time." Han Shua had already seen Grover enter a dirty, dilapidated house through the original demons. He said a few words to Phoebe and Candace, then immediately circled around the trash in front of them and burrowed into an alley filled with flies. Although they were extremely disgusted with this place, Phoebe and Candace still braced themselves and burrowed in with Han Shua. Their four hands continuously flapped in an attempt to chase away the flies around them. Chapter 86. Han Shua, Phoebe, and Candace walked into the dirty and dilapidated house and discovered that the interior was very clean and tidy. Some of the decorations could even be considered extravagant. Who would have thought that the dirty and dilapidated house was only on the outside, and that the interior was very high class? After entering, Candace fiercely shut the door tightly and made an unconcealed ping sound. She raised her broadsword in her hand and blocked the way out. "Candace, you don't need to be so careful. My good uncle doesn't know any martial arts or magic. He won't be able to escape this time." Phoebe's mask had long since been taken off her face, revealing her stunning features. She sat down casually and looked coldly at a room with an open door. Han Shua sized up the surroundings and used the original demons to observe the surroundings. He only minded his own business after discovering that no suspicious characters had appeared and poured himself a cup of warm tea, greedily taking 2 sips. A dejected Grover walked out of the open room and looked at Phoebe with a ghastly smile. Goodness. Who would have thought that you'd been hiding your strength all this time? Has Carol already been captured by you? Phoebe started, and then looked at Grover in surprise. She shook her head and said, "No, I've only just discovered this place. Let Carol live, and I'll give you everything you want, including my life." Grover knew that he couldn't escape death when things had come to this and actually let go of everything. "I'm sorry, Carol isn't in my hands. If I'm not wrong, I think Grandpa Andrew has sent people here. I think Grandpa Andrew sent someone here. Your mistress should have been taken away by Grandpa Andrew's people. I have no right to decide whether she lives or dies." Phoebe shook her head and stared coldly at Grover. She opened her mouth again. "Did you kill my father?" "Yes, I poisoned him to death. Since you know everything, I have nothing to hide. What else do you want to know?" Grover's face was numb as he nodded stiffly. Taking a deep breath, Han Shuo could clearly feel the suppressed anger from Phoebe's body. He saw Phoebe slowly stand up and look at Han Shuo and Candace, saying, "I want to be alone with my good uncle. Brian, can you guys wait for me outside?" Nodding, Han Shuo put down his teacup and left with Candace, stopping at the mouth of the alley in the distance. "Hey, can I ask you a question?" After walking out of the room, Candace stood in front of Han Shuo and kept sizing him up. She finally couldn't help but ask after a while. Han Shuo had been thinking about Duke's background with his head lowered when he heard Candace's question. Candace was a bit taller as a woman, and her skin wasn't fair, but rather a bronze color that came from being exposed to the sun for many years. Her figure appeared quite fit and tall, her twin peaks bulging as if they were about to burst out of her clothes. Her pair of strong, beautiful legs were full of explosive power, and she was as difficult to deal with as a hot mare waiting to be tamed. "What question?" Han Shuo didn't have a good impression of Candace, but he didn't dislike her either. "Why are you so clear about the assassin's attacks, as if you've seen every single one of them?" Candace's face was full of curiosity as she looked at Han Shuo with interest. "There's a magic called Eye of the Sky. You've probably heard of it? The method I use is similar to this magic. Of course, there are some differences, but I can't tell you the specifics." Han Shuo flicked a glance at her and said faintly, "Even the 2 archmages weren't able to detect your method. It's quite miraculous indeed. Can you teach this method to us? If our mercenary band obtains this method, it will greatly increase the success rate of our missions. We're willing to pay a generous price for it. I've heard that you're also a merchant. You can name a price. No matter how high it is, it's negotiable. Other forms of compensation are fine as well, as long as our mercenary band can do it." Candace looked at Han Shuo with sparkling eyes and discussed things with Han Shuo with great sincerity. Shaking his head with certainty, Han Shuo vetoed her. "I'm sorry, there are some things that I will never sell." "I'm very sorry, Miss Candace." "Then can you join our Battlefire mercenary band? As the vice chief of the mercenary band, I can directly recruit you into the band. With your strength, you're sure to achieve great things if you join our mercenary band." Candace seemed to have long since known that Han Shuo would refuse and wasn't discouraged at all. On the contrary, she invited Han Shuo to join them. "I'm sorry, I don't have such plans at the moment." Han Shuo politely declined once again. "All right, when you have such plans, remember to come to our Battlefire. I will very much welcome you to join," Candace promised solemnly. At this moment, Phoebe walked out of the house with a cold expression. Her face softened when she saw Candace and Han Shuo, asking, "What are you talking about?" "Nothing much." "Oh right, Phoebe, how's that Grover?" Candace curled her lips awkwardly and asked Phoebe, "He committed suicide. I've already gotten what I wanted to know from him. We can leave now." Phoebe's expression was odd as she looked at Candace. "I think that there's nothing else for me to do after this. Can I leave now?" Han Shuo looked at the two conversing and suddenly spoke up. Phoebe's beautiful eyes focused on Han Shuo's body and looked dazedly at Han Shuo a few times. She then said to Candace, "Candace, 2 people from your Battlefire mercenary band have escaped. Go contact them and see if anyone else has survived in our abandoned yard. Candace looked ambiguously at Phoebe and Han Shuo and revealed a knowing smile. Chapter 87. After leaving with Phoebe, Han Shuo headed straight for the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force. However, Han Shuo once again avoided the front and planned on entering from a secluded corner in the back of the mountain. When he and Phoebe had tangled together for a while in the forest, Han Shuo suddenly became vigilant. An unexplainable feeling of unease rose in his heart. This caused Han Shuo to immediately release the 3 original demons in his shock. The original demons flew out from the back of Han Shuo's neck and circled the entire forest once, but didn't discover anything. However, the uneasy feeling in his heart didn't disappear just because the original demons didn't discover anything. That extremely uncomfortable feeling grew more and more intense, causing Han Shuo to feel quite apprehensive. The demon's lair edge was already in his hand. Han Shuo took a deep breath and adjusted his facial features to their optimal state. He attempted to detect the abnormalities in his surroundings through his own eyes and shouted ahead of time, "Who's there? Come out." Han Shuo only shouted these words carelessly and didn't hold any hope. If it was an enemy of this level would absolutely not appear because of a single word from Han Shuo. However, contrary to Han Shuo's expectations, a low, sinister laugh suddenly sounded from within the dense forest as soon as he'd finished speaking. Then, a human figure gradually formed in the shadow of a large tree in front of Han Shuo. "Little fellow, you're quite vigilant. How did you discover my existence?" After the human figure in the shadow of the tree gathered, a sinister old man with an exceedingly tall and skinny body walked out. This old man's hair and beard were ash gray, and his pupils were leaden. He looked as if he didn't have any life in him. "Based on my intuition, who are you?" Han Shuo gripped the demon's lair edge tightly in his hand and stared unkindly at the gradually approaching old man, looking like he was about to make a move at any moment. "I can give you the opportunity that you're lacking. I'm acquainted with Phoebe's master. I don't have any malicious intentions towards you. You don't have to be nervous." From this person, Han Shuo could feel a strong sense of danger. This should be the most powerful person Han Shuo had encountered since he came to this world. Han Shuo even felt that if this old man made a move, he would not be able to escape death. "Phoebe? You were sent here by Phoebe. What do you want?" Han Shuo resisted the urge to run away from this person and asked with a sullen face. Suddenly, the old man stopped and did not continue forward. He only sized up Han Shuo as if he was observing a rare commodity waiting to be sold at a high price. He nodded repeatedly. After a while, a smile blossomed on his face. However, this kind of smile from his sinister face only made people feel more sinister. "Phoebe doesn't know of my existence, but I am well aware of some of your recent matters. I heard your conversation with Phoebe just now. I have a path for you to choose. However, once you choose this path, you may obtain everything you desire, but you may also die very quickly." The old man looked at Han Shuo and said softly, "Just who are you?" Han Shuo was a bit perplexed. He didn't know what the old man was after and immediately asked again, "Brian, both of my parents died when I was young. I was sold by my uncle to the necromancy major of the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force as an errand boy. After 6 years of life as an errand boy, you displayed extraordinary abilities during the trials in the Dark Forest. Apart from practicing necromancy magic, you also seem to have another miraculous training method." As the old man spoke of Han Shuo's background, Han Shuo's heart slowly sank. Apart from the secrets of the Little Skull and Han Shuo's trip to the Cemetery of Death, most of the things that Han Shuo had experienced during this period of time were spoken of. This made Han Shuo feel as if a pair of eyes were staring at him from the shadows. A kind of fear involuntarily arose in his heart. "Just who are you?" Han Shuo opened his mouth to ask about his background for the 3rd time. "I'm called Candide and I belong to the Empire's Dark Mantle organization. I take direct orders from His Majesty." "Hehe, there's a secret organization like this behind every country. I think you should be clear on the need for this kind of organization to exist. People from Shadow Ghost have appeared in the Buzzed Merchant Guild many times. Do you really think that we don't know about such a big commotion between you guys recently? Old man Candide looked at Han Shuo with a smile that wasn't quite a smile as he spoke slowly. Han Shuo was startled when he heard these words. He sighed inwardly and finally understood that he was still a bit too inexperienced. Han Shuo had never heard of the Dark Mantle organization, but he immediately understood after hearing Candide's words. This kind of organization was definitely similar to the Eastern Faction Guards and Western Faction Guards of China's ancient Ming dynasty. It should be a state apparatus that directly answered to His Majesty the Emperor. All right, what do you want from me? I want to recruit you into our Dark Mantle. I've investigated your background, and it looks like there aren't any problems. I've been paying attention to you recently. I think that your style of doing things, in addition to some special abilities, is enough for you to be qualified to work in our Dark Mantle. As long as you join our Dark Mantle and make outstanding contributions to the Empire, you can obtain everything you want. Candide stared at Han Shuo and extended an invitation. Han Shuo's brow furrowed tightly as he began to carefully consider. Candide's invitation didn't seem as simple as it seemed on the surface, but with Han Shuo's status and strength, if an enormous organization like the Dark Mantle wanted to deal with him, only death would await Han Shuo. Right now, a path was laid out in front of him. Although the road ahead was dangerous and filled with many uncertain factors, it was indeed a fortuitous opportunity. For the ambitious Han Shuo, this was indeed a strong temptation. After carefully weighing the pros and cons, Han Shuo felt that he didn't have much of a choice. After a while, Han Shuo nodded his head resolutely and said lowly, I agree. Very good. Although you'll face even more dangers in the future, as long as you climb high enough, you'll have the opportunity to see some beautiful sceneries that others will find difficult to see in their entire lives. Candide laughed lightly and took out a black iron medallion from his sleeve, handing it to Han Shuo. This is the medallion that represents our identity as a member of the Dark Mantle. Take care of it. From today on, you're directly under my command. Your first mission is to pay attention to Duke's movements. Oh, the wind archmage that flew out of the house after you guys brought Shadow Ghost to last night. The black iron medallion was extremely heavy in his hand. The words Dark Mantle were carved on the front, and the image of a crown was carved on the back. However, the crown was floating above a dark cloud, and the crown was also inky black. What's Duke's background? Where is he right now? How should I pay attention to his movements? Han Shuo's heart jumped. He thought that if Duke discovered him, he'd be very surprised. He might even guess that the Eye of Darkness was in his hands. If he paid attention to this person, then Han Shuo would have to bear even more risks. Hesitating for a moment, Candide explained, Duke isn't someone from our Lancelot Empire. He's from the Kasi Empire and is an emissary from the Kasi Empire's Maya Magic Academy. He's come to your Babylon Academy of Magic and Force for a magical exchange. Of course, these are all excuses they've given themselves. Their true intentions are definitely not like this. However, they've hidden themselves very well, and we still don't know why they've come. That's why we need people to pay attention to them. During this time, he'll frequently come to your Babylon Academy of Magic and Force. As a student there, it'll be convenient for you to keep an eye on him. Oh, right. Since you've joined our Dark Mantle, Shadow Ghost won't have any more assassins looking for trouble with you. I'll negotiate with them and have them know their place. Nodding, Han Shuo said, so that's how it is. All right, I'll pay attention to Duke's movements. Then, if I discover anything out of the ordinary, how should I find you? These are our 3 strongholds in the Empire. Destroy them immediately after you've seen them. Seeing Han Shuo standing outside the window in a daze, Amy, who was already at the door, suddenly urged him. Han Shuo immediately came to his senses and smiled kindly at Amy. He nodded and walked into the classroom. As soon as Han Shuo walked in, the gazes of the students inside all gathered on Han Shuo with a whoosh. Lisa, in particular, had been lazily squinting her eyes in the back row. Her eyes suddenly lit up as she stood up and waved at Han Shuo. over here, over here. Buck and Bella, as well as a few other students, all looked at Han Shuo with strange gazes and said something in low voices. Brian's back. Heh. Amy, do you believe that rumor? Athena suddenly asked Amy in a low voice after she'd invited Amy to sit down. I don't really believe it. Master Fanny and Brian. It doesn't look like anything could have happened between them no matter how I look at it. Camilla, that old witch, loves to stir up trouble. Do you dare believe her words? Amy pouted and shook her head. It wasn't just Amy and Athena. Han Shuo heard all the students discussing him and Fanny as he walked towards Lisa. They spoke with great detail about how Han Shuo had been discovered by Camilla on Fanny's bed that day. It was as if they'd experienced it themselves, and Han Shuo and Fanny had become a couple who'd been caught cheating. Han Shuo was dumbfounded. He hadn't thought that Camilla would be so talkative, and now all the necromancy major students knew about it. This also meant that the teachers, including Fanny herself, had likely received the news even earlier. When Han Shuo sat down next to Lisa with a wry smile, Lisa's originally excited expression turned into a censorious one. She first looked up and down Han Shuo's body in surprise, seeming to sigh at Han Shuo's changes. She then said in a cold voice, "Humph, do you think what they're saying is true? Did something really happen between you and Master Fanny?" Lisa, they don't believe me, but don't tell me that even you don't believe me. Even if I'm that kind of person, Master Fanny wouldn't be that kind of person. It's too laughable that someone would actually believe such an absurd thing. Han Shuo had a wry expression on his face as he explained softly to Lisa. Lisa exhaled lightly after Han Shuo's words, and her expression eased. However, she still said with some suspicion, "There's no smoke without fire. You ran into Master Fanny's room in the middle of the night. This should be the truth, right? Although that old witch Camilla has a foul mouth, she wouldn't go so far as to slander you without any basis." Shrugging his shoulders, Han Shuo said, "I only want to ask Master Fanny a few questions. That old witch is using this as a pretext to make a fuss. It's not like I can shut her mouth. She can say whatever she wants. I don't lose anything anyways. But this will have a great impact on Master Fanny's reputation. Everyone will surely think that Master Fanny's private life is indiscreet, especially since you're her student. Perhaps the school will even tell her to be mindful of the consequences." Lisa frowned and reminded Han Shuo. Han Shuo suddenly came to his senses after Lisa's words. He suddenly felt that he really was very selfish. He'd always been thinking of himself and hadn't considered Fanny's behalf at all. Just as Han Shuo was inwardly blaming himself, Jean had already walked into the classroom with a thick magic book in his arms. Jean swept his gaze around the room when he walked in and saw Han Shuo sitting in the back row. His face suddenly grew cold. The lesson had just begun when Jean suddenly paused and looked at Han Shuo with an evil smile. He said, "Brian, you've never taken a class since becoming a necromancy major student. Is the knowledge I'm going to talk about a bit too profound for you? Do you understand?" After experiencing the trials of the dark forest with Jean, Han Shuo understood that Jean wasn't a bad person. He was only purposefully making things difficult for Han Shuo because of Fanny. However, Jean was still a cultured person and didn't go too far in making things difficult for Han Shuo. Therefore, Han Shuo actually didn't have any irreconcilable hatred towards Jean. This time, the vinegar jar Jean must have been jealous again because of some unbearable rumors about him and Fanny. That's why he wanted to use this as a pretext to make a fool of himself here. "Master Jean, I've mostly grasped the exact meaning of the knowledge you're talking about through reading the magic book. Therefore, I think I can understand the contents of your lesson. Please don't worry about me." Han Shuo leaned back and smiled at Jean. "Oh, if it was possible to learn magic on your own through magic books, then why would our Babylon Academy of Magic and Force still exist? Heh. Since this is the case, let me ask you, how many types of magic can be divided according to how it's released? It can be divided into incantations, primers, hand gestures, and magical matrices. Incantations communicate with the magical elements through incantations to achieve the goal of releasing magic. Primers include magic scrolls. Han Shuo maintained his lazy posture and smoothly rattled off a series of definitions, including some of his own insights. Jean was obviously a bit surprised after he'd finished speaking. He first paused slightly, then nodded and said, "Not bad. It looks like you already know the basic knowledge in these books. Then I'll ask you about some other things." Jean then furrowed his brow and asked a series of questions to Han Shuhua. From the most basic magical knowledge at the beginning to some key points of magic that only novice mages could grasp, Jean opened his mouth and asked all of them. Han Shuhua spoke eloquently and clearly explained all of these questions. During this process, Jean and the other students in the classroom all looked at Han Shuhua with a face full of astonishment. It seemed that they hadn't thought that Han Shuhua would be able to understand so much profound knowledge in such a short amount of time. There were traces of sweat on Jean's forehead, and he appeared to be a bit impatient. He snorted lightly and asked another question. "I don't know this." Han Shuhua started and answered honestly. This question was something that a journeyman mage should be able to grasp, and Han Shuhua really didn't know much about it. Jean finally smiled and was about to open his mouth to say a few words to save face when Lisa said impatiently, "Master Jean, if he knew everything, then why would he be here listening to your class?" Jean was a bit embarrassed when Lisa's words stopped him in his tracks. He laughed dryly and slapped the table. "All right, then I won't ask anymore. Let's continue. How did you suddenly know so much?" Lisa's head shrank back as she asked Han Shuhua in a low voice. "Didn't I tell you just now that I learned all of this from Master Fanny? Otherwise, why would that old hag Camilla have spread the rumors?" Han Shuhua responded and then really did begin to pay attention in class. Some of the content that Jean was talking about included some intermediate and advanced magic knowledge, and was indeed what Han Shuhua needed to grasp right now. Therefore, Han Shuhua didn't develop any negative feelings because of Jean's jealousy. Lisa seemed to have something to say to Han Shuhua after class, but Han Shuhua didn't give her the chance. He immediately headed for Fanny's lab after leaving the classroom. "Fitch, I've already explained this magic many times. I think with your level of understanding, you should have long since understood why you still couldn't successfully cast it." Han Shuhua stood in front of the lab door, and his sensitive ears allowed him to clearly hear the conversation within. "Master Fanny, I think you already know how I feel about you. Why don't you give me any chances, and are instead willing to be with that lowly errand slave?" "Why?" Fitch's vehement complaints traveled from within. Han Shuhua lightly pulled the lab door open and could clearly see the anger on Fitch's face. Fanny wore black-rimmed glasses and a set of standard magic robes. A look of resignation appeared on her face as she sighed. "Fitch, I'm becoming more and more disappointed in you. First of all, Brian is now my student, just like you. You shouldn't treat him as an errand slave. In addition, I've noticed that you're not paying attention at all every time you come to me for an answer. You're always absent-minded, and I don't know what you're thinking about. Brian is much better than you in this regard." "It's Brian again, that damned errand slave. Just what is better than me in this regard? Why are you willing to be with him, but not give me any chances at all? Can it be that which Camilla was telling the truth? That you've shamelessly slept with him already?" The anger on Fitch's face grew stronger and stronger as he lowered his voice and almost roared. "Slap." Fitch was truly enraged by Fanny's slap. She looked coldly at Fitch and said, "I think there's nothing more for us to say. I said I'd wait until you advanced to Adept Mage before discussing matters of the heart in order to encourage you to work hard. But now, I can see that something is wrong with you. I can tell you clearly that there is absolutely no possibility between us. I hope you can give up all illusions. If you have any questions about magic in the future, please look for me in the training field or in the classroom. This laboratory no longer welcomes you. Can you please leave this place immediately?" "So you've been lying to me all this time. Haha, good, very good. You told me to wait until I advanced to Adept Mage before discussing matters of the heart, but that Brian is only your errand slave and already has an exception. Hypocritical, shameless woman. I'll never believe your words again." Fitch covered his face and laughed bitterly, walking out of the lab. Han Shuhua took a few steps back and hid his body in a corner. He stared coldly at Fitch's disappearing figure as he waited for Fitch to leave. He paused for a moment, then walked into Fanny's lab with a natural expression. When Han Shuhua walked in, he saw that Fanny's consciousness was a bit dazed. Her two hands were resting weakly on the round table as she lowered her head and sighed softly. She murmured weakly to herself, "Perhaps Fitch was right. I really am a hypocritical, shameless woman. I seem to have broken some rules." Han Shuo could also hear Fanny's low murmurs clearly, but he didn't understand what Fanny meant. He didn't know what she was referring to. After thinking for a moment, Han Shuo extended a finger and rapped on the round table in front of him. "Get out." Fanny suddenly lifted her head and glared fiercely at Han Shuo. When she saw that the target had become Han Shuo, the expression on her face became quite odd. She was first stunned, then startled. Her eyes seemed to want to hide something, but her expression finally returned to normal. She rolled her eyes unhappily at Han Shuo and said, "What are you doing here?" "Nothing much. I just wanted to ask some questions." Han Shuo looked oddly at Han Shuo and responded, "What did you hear? Did you see what happened just now?" Fanny's expression changed as she suddenly glared fiercely at Han Shuo. "You must have heard everything, you perverted ear. Don't you know that eavesdropping on others is a very rude behavior?" I actually didn't want to listen, but they fell into my ears of their own volition. There's nothing I can do?" Han Shuo spread out his hands like a rogue, indicating that he really hadn't done it on purpose. His expression then became serious as he looked at Fanny. "That Camilla is quite repulsive." Chapter 89. Mr. Duke, you're too courteous. If you have any questions, just ask. Fanny handed a chair to Duke and smiled faintly. Duke's gaze swept over Han Shuo's body and naturally looked at Fanny. He didn't seem to care about Han Shuo at all and didn't take the chair Fanny handed him. He said courteously to Fanny, "I won't be sitting. I just came to ask you a small question. I'll be leaving after I've asked." "Master Fanny, you've always studied necromancy magic. Have you heard of the Eye of Darkness?" Han Shuo silently watched Duke from the side. He discovered that Duke's eyes were tightly glued to Fanny after he'd finished speaking, as if he wanted to glean some clues from Fanny's face. Shaking her head, Fanny had a puzzled expression on her face and asked Duke instead, "What is this Eye of Darkness? Does it have something to do with our necromancy major?" "Heh, it's just a small tool. I'm not too sure about the specifics either, so I couldn't help but ask you. Since you don't know, then forget it. Sorry to disturb you too." Duke wore a smile on his face after he'd said these words, nodded at Fanny, and walked towards the door. Duke seemed to think of something again when he reached the door and asked carelessly, "Oh right, Master Fanny, I've heard that your necromancy major's library is together with the dark major's. Many years ago, the necromancy major was even stronger than the dark major. Does your necromancy major not have a library of its own?" "Heh, Mr. Duke, you said yourself that the necromancy major was strong many years ago. The necromancy magic that necromancers grasp is limited now, and there aren't that many books to display." Fanny replied with a light smile and then paused, saying unintentionally, "Oh right, I've heard that our academy also has a secret library. The books inside include the forbidden books of all the major majors, and are secretly preserved by the academy under the Empire's authorization. However, I've only heard other teachers mention it once and never knew where this secret library is hidden in the academy." "So that's how it is. Then I'll be leaving first. I'll be staying at your Babylon Academy of Magic and Force in the near future anyway. If there were any more problems, would I still bother you? It's my pleasure to serve you." From the looks of it, Dooku really didn't recognize him. From the beginning to the end, Dooku only glanced at him when he came in. After Dooku left, Han Shuo secretly rejoiced in his heart. "All right, what questions do you have to ask?" After Duke left, Fanny glanced at Han Shuo and said in a bad mood. The space ring glowed faintly. Han Shuo took out the questions he had prepared beforehand and sat on the chair that Duke hadn't sat on. Han Shuo started with the first question and asked Fanny. As an adept necromancer, Fanny's grasp of theoretical knowledge was indeed very comprehensive. These questions that had been perplexing Han Shuo for a long time were easily solved by Fanny's explanations. Summoning zombies is a bit more troublesome than skeletons. Because zombies are larger and heavier, you'll need to expend more mental strength when summoning them. In addition, Controlling zombies is more complicated than skeletons, and their bodies are much harder than skeletons. If you want to nimbly control them, you'll need to practice repeatedly. Fanny's voice was gentle and beautiful as she focused on explaining to Han Shua some things to take note of when summoning zombies. Han Shua's brow furrowed deeply when Fanny finished speaking and sank into deep thought. Fanny saw that Han Shua was deep in thought and didn't make a sound to disturb Han Shua. After a while, Han Shua breathed a sigh of relief and smiled. So it's because my mental strength isn't coordinated enough when I summon zombies. I've always been used to summoning skeletal warriors, and always used the same strength of mental strength to communicate with the other dimension. It looks like this is the crux of the problem. I think I understand now. After saying these words, Han Shua started chanting the incantation to summon zombies under Fanny's gaze. After the first incantation, the figure of a zombie flashed in the void, and then disappeared in an instant. Han Shua wasn't in a hurry and tried to control the strength of his mental strength. However, he didn't succeed even after 4 or 5 tries. Fanny looked at Han Shua with a cheerful smile on her face. She knew that Han Shua had already understood the meaning behind her words and was now practicing to find a suitable strength of mental strength. Once Han Shua felt the correct strength, he would be able to summon zombies completely. Forget it, there's no need to practice for now. Your direction is definitely on the right track. You just lack a bit of repetitive practice. I think you'll be able to grasp the zombie summoning magic when your mental strength is well controlled. Brian, it's only been 2 or 3 months, and you've already reached the level of a novice mage. I've never heard of such a training speed in all my years of teaching in the necromancy major. Then how do I compare to Fitch? Under Fanny's persuasion, Han Shua temporarily gave up on continuing his practice. He chuckled foolishly and looked at Fanny. Your silly smiling face makes me feel very awkward no matter how I look at it. Don't play dumb in front of me in the future. Oh, I would have forgotten about Fitch if you didn't mention him. I think he's very off right now, and I'm worried that he'll hold a grudge and purposefully make trouble for you. You need to be careful in the near future. Fanny first glared at Han Shua with rebuke, and then spoke to Han Shua with a bit of worry. Don't worry, if Fitch really doesn't know what's good for him, I think he'll be the unlucky one in the end. Han Shua shrugged and didn't care about Fitch's revenge at all. To be honest, Fitch, who was now a journeyman mage, was nothing in his eyes. Brian, I knew you'd be here. Come with me. Master Fanny, I have some business with him. Hee. Lisa's voice traveled in from outside at this moment. She walked directly in front of Han Shua and grabbed Han Shua's wrist, dragging Han Shua outside. Fanny felt a bit of resentment when she saw Han Shua being forcibly dragged away by Lisa. It was as if someone had snatched away something precious from her, making her feel a bit uncomfortable. How do you know my cousin? Lisa forcefully dragged Han Shua towards a small plaza behind the library. Han Shua freed his shoulder from Lisa's grasp and looked suspiciously at her. Your cousin? Who is he? It's Lawrence. He's currently practicing martial arts in our school of martial arts. He specifically came to find you last time, but you weren't in the faculty. Who would have thought that he'd come looking for you as soon as you've returned? How do you know him? So it's him. This Lawrence is a bit strange. He clearly has the same strong master as Phoebe, but he's still studying at the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force. And he's only a journeyman knight even now. Han Shua mused inwardly. When he lowered his head, Han Shua unintentionally saw Lisa's chest next to him. He saw that Lisa's originally flat chest was now quite shapely, and that bulging appearance clearly indicated that there was something inside. Lisa, are you wearing more clothes today? Why do I have the illusion that you're fully developed? Han Shua glanced at Lisa's chest and blurted out unconsciously. What do you mean? Lisa was walking when she heard Han Shua's words, and was so surprised that she almost tripped. Her little face blushed as she glared fiercely at Han Shua. Your chest was flat before, and there was nothing at all. But it looks like it's swollen now. Did you stuff something inside? Han Shua thought to himself, and then directly reacted to it with his mouth. He opened his mouth and gave the truest response from his heart. He was extraordinarily angry. Lisa glared fiercely at Han Shua and reached out with her little hand to firmly pinch Han Shua's arm. she said through gritted teeth. How can you say something like this and suspect that I've stuffed something inside? Do you want to die? Startled, Han Shuo suddenly realized what he'd said. Han Shuo had only thought about what he'd just said. According to Han Shuo's usual behavior, he would have kept it to himself and absolutely wouldn't have said something that would have surely angered the other and invited a rebuff to himself. But who would have thought that the current situation would be so strange? It was clearly a reflection of his heart, but Han Shuo hadn't considered the consequences and had unknowingly blurted it out. This made Han Shuo feel exceedingly strange. Chapter 90. I can indeed get my hands on black iron ore, but you also know how rare black iron ore is. It won't be easy for me to get my hands on it. How many gold coins do you plan on spending? Han Shuo pondered and spoke slowly with a calm expression. His spirits rising, Lawrence straightened his back and said with a bit of excitement, "It looks like you'll be able to get your hands on it. Heh, I only need a fist-sized piece to forge a weapon. It's currently out of stock on the black market. Name a price." Rubbing his chin, Han Shuo remembered his conversation with Phoebe last time. He hesitated and said faintly, "How about this? Give me 5,000 gold coins and I'll think of a way to get you a piece." "No problem. Although black gold ore is a bit rarer, a fist-sized piece of black iron ore is indeed worth 5,000 gold coins. If you get your hands on black iron ore, you can come find me at the night school and we'll exchange the goods," Lawrence said happily. Nodding his head, Han Shuo recalled how he'd been beaten up by Lawrence a few months ago at the Night Academy. He couldn't help but raise an eyebrow and chuckle. "I'll help you get a piece of black iron ore within 10 days. Do you want to practice martial arts with me now? I'll be happy to be your meat shield again." "All right then, why don't we start now? I just so happen to want to see just how special you are that even someone as proud and arrogant as Phoebe would praise you repeatedly in front of me. I'm quite curious about you." Lawrence struck a pose excitedly, planning on immediately making a move against Han Shuo. It was noon at this time, and most of the students in the plaza had packed up and left, preparing to eat lunch. Only 2 or 3 students sunbathing in the distance seemed to have fallen asleep and hadn't left yet. Han Shuo swept a glance around and smiled. "Let's go to the left. There's no one there, and we won't disturb anyone." Han Shuo raised his head provocatively at Lawrence after speaking and walked towards the empty space behind the railing on the left. Lawrence clenched his fists and laughed lightly, following behind Han Shuo and also walking towards the empty space on the left. As soon as he arrived, Han Shuo circulated his magical yuan throughout his body and began to adjust his condition. Lawrence followed a few steps behind Han Shuo and had just walked down the stone steps. Before he could react, Han Shuo had already turned around with lightning speed and smashed his fist towards Lawrence's head. Lawrence hadn't expected Han Shuo to act so quickly. Before he could react, a terrifying punch had already arrived in front of him. Lawrence's expression changed slightly as he suddenly took a step back and returned to the top of the stone steps. He then leaned to the side to dodge Han Shuo's sudden punch. Han Shuo's fist whistled past Lawrence's face. A cold aura emanated from Han Shuo's left fist, causing Lawrence to jump in fright. Without waiting for Lawrence to react, Han Shuo retracted his left arm and suddenly bent it, striking Lawrence's chest with his elbow. Lawrence gave a muffled groan as his body was pressed against the railing by Han Shuo's elbow. His face reddened slightly. "Heh, Lawrence, you're not vigilant enough." Han Shuo didn't follow up with another attack after striking Lawrence's chest with his elbow. Instead, he retreated with an odd smile and mocked Lawrence in a peculiar tone. The two were only exchanging pointers and not fighting to the death. Therefore, Han Shuo hadn't used his full magical yuan in this punch, and the mystical glacial spellfire had only released a small amount of frosty air. As a journeyman knight, Lawrence's fighting aura had automatically protected his body and he hadn't suffered any injuries. "You're the one who suddenly ambushed me. This punch doesn't count. I'll make you pay the price later." Lawrence wasn't angry and only stated the facts with a wry face. He suddenly looked at Han Shuo with a cautious gaze when he walked down the stone steps again. Light green fighting aura abruptly blossomed from Lawrence's two hands as his footsteps abruptly sped up. He approached Han Shuo like lightning, and the fighting aura in his left hand suddenly coalesced into the shape of a sword of light, chopping down at Han Shuo's head. Lawrence had just witnessed Han Shuo's speed and strength and understood that the current Han Shuo couldn't even be mentioned in the same breath as last time. This was why he'd used fighting aura. However, he was a bit cautious in his movements and was obviously holding back. A trace of a smile appeared on Han Shuo's lips as he took in Lawrence's movements. He gauged the strength of Lawrence's fighting aura. Han Shuo didn't dodge at all as he circulated the mystical glacial spellfire with his right hand. A thin light red line appeared as Han Shuo's right fist swung out, smashing onto the sword of light formed from Lawrence's fighting aura together with Han Shuo's right fist. A muffled bang rang out as the sword of light formed from Lawrence's fighting aura turned into specks of starlight and dissipated. Lawrence's ferocious charge was forcibly blocked. Han Shuo felt his right fist go numb as his body involuntarily took 2 steps back. "Lawrence, how much of your fighting aura did you use when you formed the sword of light just now?" Han Shuo's eyes sparkled as he looked at Lawrence and asked. 60%. Lawrence responded and then looked at Han Shuo with surprise. "Your speed and aura are noticeably different compared to a few months ago. It looks like you did it on purpose last time, but why would you rather take a beating to earn 5 gold coins?" A few months ago, Han Shuo was just a rookie who hadn't experienced battle before, and his magical yuan was only at the first level of the solid realm. He'd done it for the gold coins, but most importantly for the sake of training his body. He smiled and bid farewell to Han Shuo before walking back to the Night Academy. He muttered softly, "What a strange person indeed. The strength of his body can probably compare to some strong orc warriors." Han Shuo thought inwardly as he returned to the necromancy major without stopping. Phoebe needed some time to prepare rations, so Han Shuo didn't plan on returning to the Cemetery of Death for the time being. Add to that the fact that Duke was still in the academy, and Han Shuo didn't know his exact plans, so he decided to temporarily stay in the necromancy major after thinking for a bit. Han Shuo's dormitory had long since been arranged by Fanny, but Han Shuo hadn't lived in it yet. Since he planned on staying in the academy for the time being, this dormitory could finally be put to use. As the largest academy in the Empire, the facilities within the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force were indeed very complete. It was no wonder that every student was charged exorbitant tuition fees. Han Shuo's dormitory was in the corner of the second floor and was about 50 to 60 square meters. It included a washroom and a bedroom, with a bed, chairs, tables, and mirrors. Compared to the warehouse that Han Shuo had stayed in before, it was like heaven and earth. It was already past noon when he arrived at the dormitory. Han Shuo had missed the time to eat and could only take out a few pieces of dried meat from his space ring to fill his stomach. After eating his fill, Han Shuo didn't leave the dormitory. He shut the door tightly and sat on his bed, taking advantage of the silence to train his magical yuan. The magical yuan circulated and slowly gathered in his mind from all parts of his body. A clear and slightly cool feeling filled his mind, making Han Shuo feel as if his brain was being washed in a cool pool. However, this feeling only lasted for a short while before the comfortable feeling in his mind was replaced by an unforgettable pain. This level of molded spirit training caused his mind to constantly alternate between comfort and pain. One moment he felt incredibly comfortable and lazy. The next moment he was in so much pain that Han Shuo felt as if someone was forcefully churning his brain with a sharp knife. What was most unbearable to Han Shuo was that every time the pain was intense, his mind would become incomparably clear. In this way, it was as if the pain was suddenly magnified by 10 times. The clarity of his mind seemed to specifically allow him to endure even greater pain, causing Han Shuo to want to curse that the creator of this magical yuan was indeed a pervert. After a long, long time, Han Shuo exhaled lightly and temporarily stopped training his magical yuan. His body was drenched in sweat, giving off steam as if he'd just taken a hot bath. A strong masculine scent wafted out. The training of magical yuan caused Han Shuo to stay up from afternoon to night. The night scene outside the window was enchanting, and the cool night breeze blew in. The surroundings were silent and still. Getting up from his cross-legged position, Han Shuo went to the washroom to run some hot water. He then lay contentedly in the bathtub, enjoying a rare moment of relaxation and comfort. He even hummed a little tune in comfort. In the dead of night, it was the perfect time for those with ill intentions to come and go. Han Shuo was leisurely bathing when he suddenly heard two soft sounds. One came from the dormitory, and the other from outside the window. 3 original demons flew out soundlessly from the back of Han Shuo's neck. 2 of them passed through the window and arrived outside. One floated in the direction of the sound, while the other stayed at the window, silently observing the surroundings for any abnormalities. The last original demon floated out through the crack in the door and arrived in the hallway of the dormitory. It continued along the hallway and also floated in the direction of the sound. After floating for a while, the original demon that had left finally discovered Duke, whose feet weren't touching the ground and whose body was flying along the shadows of the surrounding buildings. Duke didn't wear a black mask this time. He was like a ghost in the dark night, floating weightlessly towards the dark major school building. The original demon in the hallway discovered that one of the dormitory doors had been lightly opened. A dark-faced Fitch quietly left the room and walked towards Han Shuo. Judging from the expression on his face, he didn't seem to have good intentions. He immediately jumped out of the bathtub and quickly wiped off the water on his body. Han Shuo put on his underpants and returned to his bed. He lay down with his back to the door, and even breathing sounds emitted from his mouth. Chapter 91. Fitch, who thought he was being cautious, tiptoed to Han Shuo's door like a thief. He looked around furtively and used a low voice to summon a vengeful spirit, which entered Han Shuo's room through the crack in the door. Han Shuo's original demon had been cultivated from a vengeful spirit, and a vengeful spirit could also give the summoner a different perspective. However, as a creature summoned by a necromancer, a vengeful spirit carried a faint aura of necromancy, and was also in a grayish-white form. Anyone who was a bit more vigilant would easily discover the vengeful spirit's tracks. Because Han Shuo's original demon had been specially processed by magical yuan, there were no magical pulses on it, and its form was also in a state of nothingness. As long as it didn't touch a magical boundary, it would be very difficult to discover its tracks. Add to that the fact that the original demon was a little demon of a magical practitioner and was connected to the caster's mind. Not only could it be released over a very long distance, but it also had quite the offensive effect. Therefore, the original demon was much more convenient and practical than a vengeful spirit, no matter how one looked at it. After Fitch's vengeful spirit entered Han Shuo's room, it circled Han Shuo's room once and then stopped in front of Han Shuo's window, as if it was silently observing Han Shuo's movements. Breathing evenly, Han Shuo seemed to be in a deep sleep as he lay on his side, completely unaware of everything that was happening around him. Fitch probed around with the help of the vengeful spirit, then pressed his left hand on the doorknob in front of the room's door and exerted a bit of force. A low creak sounded out as Han Shuo's door was opened by Fitch. A packet of powder suddenly appeared in his hand. Fitch opened the paper packet and blew on it. The powder drifted through the air, emitting a faint, fragrant scent. Sleeping powder. Han Shuo had some understanding of poisonous powder by now, and Han Shuo had already recognized it when the fragrant scent had just spread a bit. Han Shuo didn't hold his breath as he continued to breathe in and out naturally. With his powerful physical body, after reaching the 3rd level of magical yuan, this kind of low-level sleeping powder was completely useless against him. With a sinister smile on his face, Fitch's expression was a bit carefree as he walked lightly to Han Shuo's bed and stared hatefully at Han Shuo, his thoughts unknown. With the aid of the original demon's line of sight, Han Shuo took in all of Fitch's expressions with his eyes closed. Although his body remained in a sleeping state, Han Shuo had long since made preparations in his heart. He planned to make a move as soon as the situation took a turn for the worse. If Fitch dared to make a move, then Han Shuo would dare to kill in this place. However, Fitch didn't appear to be as daring as Han Shuo had imagined. He stared at Han Shuo for a while and said to himself, "You're just a lowly errand slave. You don't deserve Master Fanny at all. I should have kicked you out of the necromancy major a long time ago, but you've never been in the necromancy major. Let's see where you can run this time. After tomorrow, everyone will think you're a perverted pervert. Even if Master Fanny helps you, the school will still kick you out of the necromancy major. I've spent a lot of effort in order to deal with you, heh?" Fitch murmured lowly and fished out a large bag of items from his chest. He bent down and stuffed the bag under Han Shua's bed, and then slowly retreated out of Han Shua's room with a dark smile on his face. He then carefully closed Han Shua's door and walked back to his own room in a relaxed and satisfied manner. Han Shua immediately climbed out of bed after Fitch had left. He bent down to take a look and discovered that Fitch had hung the bag of items on the wooden board under his bed. If he hadn't been paying close attention, he likely wouldn't have noticed it. Removing the bag of items, Han Shua opened it and took a look. He was flabbergasted. What entered his eyes were some thin female undergarments. These undergarments were of a myriad of colors and had lace edges. There was very little fabric, and they were either cute or sexy. Some of the undergarments had just been washed, and two of them looked like they'd just been taken off and hadn't had time to be washed. There were even traces of the female body on them. Han Shua stared at the female undergarments in the bag and finally sighed at Fitch's superb methods. He began to admire Fitch in his heart. However, what Han Shua admired wasn't Fitch's evil schemes, but rather his methods. He hadn't thought that Fitch would be able to obtain so many female undergarments in the academy without a sound. He just didn't know if any of the teachers were among them. Shaking his head and laughing involuntarily, Han Shua knew that some of the female students in the academy would be in an uproar the next morning when they discovered that their undergarments had been stolen. Fitch definitely had other tricks up his sleeve. Perhaps there would be people searching the male students' rooms one by one tomorrow. If this bag of items was discovered under his bed, then Han Shua would certainly be labeled as a perverted sex fiend. At that time, before the academy could expel him, Han Shua would likely be too ashamed to face anyone and wouldn't dare appear within the academy again. "You're heartless, so I'll be unjust. Fitch, oh Fitch, don't blame me for being vicious." Han Shua picked up the bag of items and laughed evilly as he got off the bed. He used an original demon to scout the way and similarly walked towards Fitch's room. Using almost the exact same method, Han Shua borrowed the vision of the original demon and imitated Fitch's methods. He first drugged the items and then soundlessly made his way to Fitch's room. He placed the bag of items under Fitch's bed and finally left without a trace. Han Shua didn't go to sleep when he returned to his room after completing this task. He continued to observe Duke's movements through the other original demon. Duke flew directly to a classroom on the 4th floor after arriving at the Dark Major school building. There was not a soul in the school building at night, and Duke didn't move a muscle in this room, as if he was one with the darkness. Han Shua stopped in the shadow of a large tree outside the window through the original demon and secretly watched Duke. Except, Duke didn't move a muscle after arriving here and didn't make any further movements. This rather puzzled Han Shua. He didn't know what Duke was doing in the school building in the middle of the night. After waiting for a while, just as Han Shua was starting to feel a bit impatient, a ball of black light suddenly appeared in the distance and slowly made its way in the direction of the school building. If one didn't pay attention in the darkness, it would be difficult to discover the existence of this ball of black light. Han Shua's expression shook, and he immediately raised his attention, carefully observing the movements of this ball of light. The black light within was thick like a thick layer of clouds, making it difficult for Han Shua to see what was going on inside. When this ball of light entered the Dark Major school building, the originally motionless Duke seemed to have sensed it. He suddenly let out a weak cough. The ball of black light paused for a moment after Duke coughed. Then, it quickly passed through the stairs and went directly to the room Duke was in. Finally, Dooku and the black figure met through the door. Duke flicked a glance at the black light that had stopped in front of the classroom door, and a trace of a smile appeared on his face. He said softly, "The people of the Empire's Dark Nether are indeed everywhere. There are even people of the Dark Nether lurking in this Babylon Academy of Magic and Force. They seem to recognize you. I think it's time for you to reveal your true face. I've already stayed in this academy for many years. I spent a great deal of effort in order to enter. I absolutely cannot reveal my identity. There are quite a few archmages with the same level of training as you in the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force. The headmaster is even a Grand Magus. It'll be no small matter if she's alarmed. Han Shua's familiar voice sounded from within the black light. The black light then parted layer by layer like thick clothing, revealing the figure of the old Dark Witch Camilla. It's her. Han Shua was startled and immediately paid even more attention to everything within, afraid of missing a single word of the two's conversation. The Lancelot Empire had a secret, Dark Mantle organization, and the Kasi Empire definitely had a similar organization. It looked like this Camilla should be someone from the Kasi Empire, and was actually a member of the Kasi Empire's Dark Nether organization. This was rather interesting. So it's you. Hehe, I even saw you today. I didn't think you'd be one of us. The Empire's Dark Mantle is indeed remarkable. It looks like my mission this time will be a little smoother. Duke was also very surprised after Camilla revealed her true appearance. It's very dangerous for the two of us to meet here. The Lancelot Empire's Dark Mantle isn't easy to deal with either. I've had a few encounters with them here, and they're like flies surrounding you. If my identity is exposed, not only will I die a horrible death, I'll also fail to live up to the Empire's nurturing. Cut the crap. Why are you contacting me? Camilla looked at Duke and impatiently urged him to get down to business. Nodding, Duke said solemnly, I'm burdened with many responsibilities on this trip to the Lancelot Empire. If it wasn't for the fact that I can't resolve them on my own, I wouldn't dare trouble your Dark Nether. I asked Master Fanny of the Necromancy Major today, and heard that apart from the libraries of the various majors, there's also a private library in the Academy. We need to find some information. So I wanted to ask if you know where this library is and how to enter it. There is indeed a private library, and a few extremely rare and precious books are stored within. Not only have I heard of this library, but I've even had the honor of browsing through it once. However, this library has a magical boundary personally set up by the Dean. Outsiders have no way of entering without the Dean's permission. The last time I went in, I was preparing to look up questions related to curses of the Dark Major, so I went in with the Dean's company. If you want to barge into this private library, you'll certainly be discovered by the Dean. I advise you to think of another way. Camilla had a face of helplessness as she solemnly warned Duke. Duke's face darkened when he heard Camilla's words, and he thought for a while, saying to Camilla, if that's the case, then I can only trouble you to think of a way to enter. The Empire wants to know all the information related to the Eye of Darkness. Go in and see if there's anything related to this. Before I came, the higher-ups of your Dark Nether instructed that you can be directly mobilized at critical times. I hope you understand. If the Empire wants to investigate this matter, they can directly issue an order to me through the Dark Nether. Why trouble you to personally make a trip here? Camilla looked suspiciously at Duke and didn't immediately agree, instead opening her mouth to ask Duke, you don't need to concern yourself with this matter. The Empire naturally has other plans for sending us here. Chapter 92. Early the next morning, Han Shua had already heard a ruckus from outside the window before he'd even woken up. The topic of the stolen undergarments was quickly discovered under the influence of people with ulterior motives, and spread to every corner of the Necromancy Major in the blink of an eye. Jean and Fanny had been extremely busy in the morning, and it was precisely because of this matter that the students were quickly gathered in the training field. The faces of the female students were filled with anger and fear. The male students were also filled with surprise, and some even had looks of schadenfreude on their faces. Han Shua was also gathered in the training field, and as he listened to the chatter of a group of people, his gaze continuously roamed over Fitch's face. Fitch's expression was normal, but his eyes flickered incessantly as he swept his gaze over Han Shua's direction from time to time. The repercussions of this matter are exceedingly bad. Nothing major has ever happened to our Necromancy Major, but now that something like this has suddenly occurred, we must thoroughly investigate this matter. Jean also had a face full of indignation as he loudly expressed his opinion. Lisa, you guys are too careless. How could you let the thief succeed so easily and not even notice anything? Fanny furrowed her brow as she chastised Lisa. This is the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force. We hadn't thought that the thief would be so arrogant. Nothing has ever happened to our necromancy major in such a long time, and the clothes we changed out of weren't anything valuable. Who would have thought that there would be such a perverted sex fiend? Lisa had a wry expression on her face as she spoke with grievance. Amy, Athena, Bella, and the other girls all had indignant expressions on their faces as they chattered incessantly, yelling that if they found the thief, they would be severely punished. This matter has already caused a very bad influence in our necromancy major. The school authorities have already taken over the investigation. I don't know who would be so shameless and bold as to do something so outrageous. Fanny was a bit vexed, but she was even more enraged as she spoke angrily. There was no end to the discussion within the training grounds. The anger of the female student whose underwear had been stolen could not be quelled. Han Shuo coldly observed everything, silently waiting for the next development. Who do you think did it? Lisa unknowingly came to Han Shuo's side and asked Han Shuo. Shrugging his shoulders, Han Shuo smiled and said, How would I know? But the person who did this should be very familiar with our place. Otherwise, they wouldn't have succeeded so easily. Although you guys are a little weak, if it was an ordinary person who wasn't familiar with this place doing this, I think you guys should have noticed it. Hehe, now none of you have discovered it. I admire this person's methods. You're still making sarcastic remarks at a time like this? My underwear was also stolen. This person really is a shameless pervert. If I find out who did it, I definitely won't let him off. Lisa clenched her fists and said hatefully, That'll have to wait until you catch him. Han Shuo chatted carelessly with Lisa, but his gaze constantly roamed over Fitch's face. A middle-aged swordsman walked in amidst the clamor within the training grounds. He was Vita, who was in charge of all the miscellaneous matters within the school. Han Shuo had met him once before. This person had always been known for his severity. If there were students who fought without permission, or if any abnormal situations occurred, he was the one to deal with them. I'm clear of the gist of what has happened. I've been observing the female dormitory just now. Humph, I've already guessed who did this. Vita's eyes immediately swept over the area where Han Shuo and the others were when he walked in, speaking indifferently. Uncle Vita, who did this? Hurry up and tell us. Amy stood next to Vita and urged him in a sweet voice. Vita's expression was stiff as he looked in Han Shuo's direction. He should know best who did this. I hope he'll confess to his mistakes. As long as he confesses, I can promise at least that I won't hand him over to the Empire of Justice for investigation. But if he refuses to admit his guilt, then don't blame me for being discourteous. Mr. Weeder, what is the meaning of this? Why are you yelling at our students? Do you think that this was done by them? This is too preposterous, Fanny said with displeasure when she saw Vita's cold expression and his gaze roaming over the faces of the male students. Master Fanny, this isn't absurd at all. It must be done by one of your good students. I've been observing in the female dormitory just now and discovered a pair of extremely faint footprints leading from the windowsill of the female dormitory to the male dormitory, avoiding the undergrowth. Hehe, I've dealt with this kind of thing many times. Don't think you can hide it from me. I think Master Fanny should understand what this means. Vita laughed heartily, believing himself to be infallible, and made his judgment of this matter. It looked like Fitch was quite attentive, and had even left footprints to point Vita in the right direction. However, this Vita didn't seem to be all that brilliant. This made Han Shuo feel a bit of contempt and looked down on this person. As soon as these words came out, it immediately set off a huge uproar. The boys immediately raised their voices and said that they did not do it, while the group of girls, led by Bella, looked at them angrily. The way they looked at every boy was very unfriendly, as if everyone was suspected of doing such a thing. Lisa, don't look at me like that. I feel very uncomfortable. Lisa also had an odd expression on her face as she swept her gaze over Han Shuo's face. Although Han Shuo hadn't done anything, He still felt goosebumps rise all over his body when she stared at him like this. It was as if he really had become a shameless, perverted sex fiend. Heh, I'm just scaring you. I believe that you definitely wouldn't do something like this. Lisa saw that Han Shua's scalp was a bit numb and laughed daintily at Han Shua. At this moment, Vita was already a bit impatient and said with a cold face, I think that one of you can admit to your crimes at this time. As long as you're willing to take the initiative to admit your wrongs, we'll resolve this matter privately within the academy. However, if you're holding on to your wishful thinking and don't repent, then don't blame me for being discourteous. As the thief, Fitch had already properly placed the items in Han Shua's room. He was quite pleased with himself and naturally wanted Vita to continue investigating. The other students hadn't done anything and naturally wouldn't be afraid of anything. Everyone's expressions were more serious than the last, and they had a clear conscience. Fitch even said with a strong sense of righteousness, we should strictly investigate this matter. This kind of thing cannot be condoned. Bach and the others agreed repeatedly, expressing their attitude that the thief would be severely punished. It was as if the more resolute their attitudes were, the more they could prove their innocence. Brian, why didn't you say anything? Amy couldn't help but ask in confusion when she saw Han Shua standing there with a slight smile on his lips and not saying a word, forming a stark contrast with the other students who were filled with righteous indignation. He can't be feeling guilty, right? Heh, it's strange. He hasn't been in the necromancy major these days, and nothing has happened at all. He seemed to have just moved into the dormitory yesterday, and this kind of thing happened immediately. This seems quite coincidental. Bella, who had some old grudges with Han Shua, suddenly exclaimed softly as if she had discovered a new continent. Her exclamation and her words did make a bit of sense. Everyone's gazes all landed on Han Shua, all of them full of suspicion. There were even some people who wore expressions of disgust, as if Han Shua was that perverted pervert. There's no use expressing one's attitude. I think Mr. Vita will be able to investigate who did it. I'm very much looking forward to it. Han Shua shrugged his shoulders and said faintly. Seeing that no one was admitting to it, Vita snorted coldly and said, All right, since this is the case, don't blame me for being rude. Not much time has passed since this incident occurred. I think that the thief will only hide the items on his body or in his room after obtaining them. Fanny, Master Jean, let's search their bodies first. After we've searched their bodies, we'll search their dormitories. I don't think they'll hide the items. Under Vita's request, the group of male students all stripped down to their shorts. Vita and Jean were responsible for searching their bodies. When Han Shua had also taken off his clothes, Vita revealed an astonished expression. He stared at Han Shua's naked body with sparkling eyes and suddenly said, Are you really a mage? When Vita's words were spoken, everyone couldn't help but pay attention to Han Shua. They saw that Han Shua's naked body was well-proportioned and strong, full of masculine tension and strength. It looked like his physique was even stronger and more perfect than the average warrior's. There was a clear difference between this and some of the skinny or fat students. No wonder Vita was so surprised. When did your body become so good? I remember that you used to be thin and small. Lisa's eyes shone as she stared closely at Han Shua's naked body, exclaiming in high spirits. When the other female students saw Han Shua's attractive male body and compared it to the room full of fat and ribs, they immediately felt that Han Shua's outstanding body could be called perfect. They were also quite astonished. The bashful Amy blushed slightly and said something to Athena in a low voice, causing Athena to also blush shyly. She looked at Han Shua's body with an odd gaze. Fanny's face was also a bit red, as if she didn't dare look directly at Han Shua's body. She first turned her head away, and then took advantage of the fact that no one was paying attention to sneak a few fierce glances at Han Shua's body. I was also malnourished before and didn't develop. Now that I've eaten well, of course I've developed like you. Han Shua stared ambiguously at Lisa's chest and said meaningfully, You're so annoying. Lisa panicked when she saw Han Shua stare at her chest and rebuked Han Shua bashfully. After this little interlude, Vita searched through everyone's clothes and didn't find anything. Vita said, It looks like they've been hidden in the dorms. Let's start investigating the dorms now. Brian seems to have a space ring. Bella suddenly spoke up, just as everyone was about to leave. Vita, who'd been about to leave, stopped when Bella's words left his mouth. He looked in surprise at the space ring on Han Shua's hand and exclaimed, "So that's a space ring. I almost missed it." However, space rings aren't easy to search. This will be a bit difficult. How about this? Give me your space ring first, and I'll find the dean. As a space Grand Magus, the dean will have a way to open your space ring. I hope you'll cooperate with me. First, looking coldly at Bella in the distance, Han Shua said directly to her, "You ugly woman, you're really very annoying." Bella's face was full of anger at first, but then she saw the coldness in Han Shua's eyes and remembered Han Shua's crazy behavior in the dark forest. She involuntarily took a step back in fear and opened her mouth, but didn't dare say another word. At this moment, Han Shua's heart sank, and he suddenly felt quite conflicted. There were some things in his space ring that couldn't see the light of day. If the dean discovered them, Han Shua would be in great trouble. "What? Is there something shameful in your space ring?" Vita looked at Han Shua and asked when he saw that Han Shua was hesitating and unwilling to cooperate. "I believe that he wouldn't do such a thing. I think we should first investigate the dorms and then discuss the matter of his space ring." Fanny thought for a bit when she saw Han Shua's troubled expression and suddenly spoke up to persuade him. Vita looked at Fanny in surprise and then nodded woodenly. "Then you keep an eye on him during this time. Don't let him leave your sight or do anything. You'll bear the responsibility if anything goes wrong. Let's go take a look at the dorms." Jean suggested to smooth things over. The group then left and walked to the male dorms. All of the students stayed below and watched over by Fanny. Jean and Vita entered the dorms, and the sound of things being turned over could be heard. Fitch looked at Han Shua and Fanny, standing together with a face full of satisfaction. He thought of the punishment Han Shua was about to face and felt an unprecedented comfort in his heart. "Thank you, Master Fanny." Han Shua expressed his sincere thanks as he looked at Fanny beside him. Rolling her eyes at Han Shua, Fanny said in a low, admonishing voice, "What shameful things are there in your space ring? Even the dean wouldn't take them away if he saw them. What are you afraid of?" "The weapons and some medicine I got last time in the town of Droll. I picked up some of the good stuff and kept some. If the dean looked through my space ring, he'd definitely discover this batch of stolen goods. Our department has divided these things up privately and distributed the gold coins. If the dean saw that our entire department was in trouble, don't you think there's something wrong with Bella's head?" Han Shua said. Fanny suddenly fell into a daze when she heard these words. Her face was full of worry as she furrowed her brow in thought. Suddenly, Jean and Vita walked out from inside and walked towards Fitch as he smiled proudly. Vita said coldly, "Did you think I wouldn't discover it if you hung it under the bed with a hook?" All gazes of disdain and disgust instantly landed on Fitch's proud face. While Fitch was still stunned, he was drowned out by the sharp, angry curses of the female students. However, judging by the time Camilla had entered the headmaster's office, Han Shua believed that she hadn't entered yet. This was because Camilla had only walked out a few minutes after entering. "You really are in the training field. I knew you would be here." In the morning, while the others were still in class, Han Shua was practicing controlling zombie warriors alone in the training field. Suddenly, Fanny walked in and said, "What are you doing here? Didn't you have class in the afternoon?" Han Shua didn't stop practicing even after Fanny walked in. He spoke a few words and continued to control the zombie warrior to nimbly circle around an obstacle. "I came to find you." You've grasped it quite quickly. Heh. With your rapid improvement, I think you'll be able to enter the next stage before long." Fanny smiled and praised Han Shua when she saw that he could already control zombies with great proficiency. She then paused and furrowed her brows, saying in confusion, "Brian, although your potential is quite good, the speed at which your mental strength is condensed shouldn't have increased so quickly. Mental strength meditation doesn't have much to do with potential, especially when you've just started training. Mental strength will only slowly increase with the accumulation of years and months. How is it that you've already possessed the mental strength of a novice mage in just a few short months? This is incredible. Just how did you do it? It was natural for Fanny to have such doubts. A large part of the reason why Han Shua's mental strength had improved so quickly was because of the effects of the Eye of Darkness. Han Shua had also inexplicably and rapidly improved amidst the head-splitting pain. Now that his magical yuan had entered the molded spirit realm, the potential in his brain had been unlocked. When Han Shua meditated, the speed at which he gathered his mental strength increased once again. It was impossible for his mental strength not to be fast when training with this kind of superimposed training. Shrugging, Han Shua said, "How would I know? My body is quite strange to begin with. Not only is it much stronger than the average mage, but the speed at which mental strength meditates is also quite fast. Can it be that you have the legendary body of divine favor?" Fanny was first startled, and then her face abruptly grew wild with joy as she spoke with a bit of excitement. When she said this, Han Shua was also startled and asked blankly, "What is a body of divine favor?" In this world, there are an extremely small number of people who are born with bodies that are different from others. It's hard to find 1 in 10,000 of these people. Their bodies are a bit different from ordinary people. Some people are naturally suited to training fighting aura, and some are naturally suited to training as mages. If these people can find a suitable field, then their accomplishments are often quite outstanding. Because these people's bodies are different from ordinary people, legend has it that they've received the favor of the gods. Some of the most outstanding figures on the continent now have this type of body of divine favor. Can it be that you're also in this situation? An indescribable light of excitement flashed through Fanny's eyes as she stared at Han Shua and exclaimed in surprise, "Perhaps." Han Shua knew that the abnormalities of his body were completely due to the training of magical yuan and shouldn't have anything to do with the body of divine favor. However, Han Shua naturally couldn't find any reasonable explanation. Being labeled as having a body of divine favor was a plausible excuse. After Fanny's excitement had subsided, her expression suddenly became grave as she said seriously, "If this matter is true, you absolutely cannot tell anyone before you become strong enough. This body of divine favor may bring you unimaginable glory and wealth, but it may also cause you to be killed by those with ill intentions before you've even matured." Han Shua understood very well what Fanny was saying. If it was as she said, then such a person would be an invaluable asset to every country. This kind of person would be like a treasure and become the target of competition between countries. There was also the possibility that they would be destroyed at all costs. Therefore, people with this kind of body were actually quite dangerous. Nodding his head to indicate that he understood, Han Shua avoided this topic and asked Fanny, "You said you came to find me just now. What's the matter?" "I mentioned to you last time that there's a test to ascertain the true strength of the students and to record their current levels. Our Babylon Academy of Magic and Force has the right to determine the levels from Magic Apprentice to Adept Mage. This level will be recorded in the files of the Magic Association and will follow you for life. It's also a symbol of your strength and status. Once you've passed the level of Adept Mage, you'll be considered to have graduated from our Babylon Academy of Magic and Force. If you want to receive recognition after your strength has increased, you'll have to pass the Magic Association's specialized test. For mages, a proven level is proof of your future development because it's quite useful." Fanny explained with a smile when she saw Han Shua ask, "So that's how it is. When will the test begin?" "Tomorrow morning. If the students feel that their strength has increased, then they'll take the initiative to participate in the test. You've never taken the test before, so I think it shouldn't be difficult for you to pass the Novice Mage test. I've already signed you up, and you'll be taking the test in the Dark Mage's training fields tomorrow morning. I'll also be there. Don't forget." Fanny reminded Han Shu. "No problem. By the way, Brian, last time you told me about the corpse resurrection and canopy of necromancy. They just so happen to be buried in places with dense chi, and if that place happened to be one of the 5 extreme places, there was a small chance that they'd become an extremely powerful zombie after absorbing chi and the strange materials of the 5 extreme places over a long period of time. According to the attributes of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth, the 5 extreme places were place of extreme metal, place of extreme wood, place of extreme water, place of extreme fire, and place of extreme earth. After absorbing enough chi and the power of the 5 elements, the zombies that had a small chance of forming were the metal elite zombie, the wood elite zombie, the water elite zombie, the fire elite zombie, and the earth elite zombie. After these 5 types of zombies took form, their bodies were much stronger than ordinary zombies. The most miraculous thing was that these zombies that had absorbed enough chi and the power of the 5 elements could use the power of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth respectively. If these 5 types of zombies were to gather together and form the great formation of penta-elemental undead, its power would be even more frightening. However, these zombies were very rare to begin with. Add to that the fact that they were never under anyone's control and viewed each other with enmity, and were pursued by cultivators, it was very difficult for all 5 elemental zombies to gather together. In Chu Kanglin's memories, there were all sorts of detailed descriptions of the formation of these 5 elemental zombies. Chu Kanglin even had a secret method to accelerate the birth of these zombies. It seemed that he had once researched this topic. After obtaining all of this, Han Shua suddenly felt as if he'd obtained a priceless treasure. He instantly had the idea of refining these 5 elemental zombies. With the restriction of necromancy magic, these zombies would unconditionally obey Han Shua after taking form. He had long since discovered that the location of the Cemetery of Death where Han Shua resided was a place of extreme earth. He could slowly search for the other 4 extreme places. Now, he only lacked a few materials that Chu Kanglin's secret method to accelerate the formation of these zombies, and then he could refine the Earth Elite Zombie. As soon as this idea appeared, Han Shua immediately made up his mind to see if he could refine these 5 types of zombies to form the great formation of penta-elemental undead. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.